The last thing Maximus remembered before waking up beneath the shade of an unfamiliar tree was the deafening roar of his private jet's engines failing midair. He recalled the violent tremors, the frantic alarms, and the final moment of impact as his plane plunged into the Atlantic Ocean. He had braced for death, for darkness, or the cold embrace of the abyss. Instead, he found himself adrift in an empty void, suspended between existence and oblivion. For how long? He had no idea. Then, just as suddenly, he awoke. An unfathomable presence. Still dazed, Maximus took in his surroundings, trying to make sense of what had just happened. The world around him was eerily silent, as if holding its breath. It was only then that he noticed the figure standing before him. A woman, radiating power, watched him with a knowing smile. As amusing as it would be to watch you scramble for answers, I should warn you, she said, her voice smooth and laced with amusement. I am a goddess, and I am here only to explain. Maximus stared at her, his mind racing. The goddess chuckled softly, as if she could read every thought flashing through his head. I know what you're thinking, she teased. Something along the lines of, this can't be real, I imagine. Maximus took a step back, his instincts screaming at him that this being, whatever she was, could erase him with a thought. Fascinating, he muttered, despite the dizziness creeping into his mind. The sheer impossibility of the situation left him feeling like a ship caught in a storm. Oh, struggling to process it all, the goddess leaned casually against a tree, her silver eyes glinting with mischief. Her laughter echoed through the endless void. Where am I? Maximus finally demanded. What is this place? She smiled. You are in a realm beyond mortal comprehension. This is my domain, she explained. When your plane crashed into the ocean, your soul became lost between worlds, trapped between life and death. I intercepted it. Maximus absorbed her words slowly. Why? He finally asked. The goddess shrugged, her ethereal aura shimmering under the unseen light. Why not? She countered. Your soul is unique, Maximus. It has a spark, a vitality that intrigued me. She paused before continuing. But, rather than waste time with explanations, let's get to the point. Maximus listened intently as the goddess laid out his fate. Obviously, you died in your old world. Your soul was too valuable to let drift aimlessly into nothingness. So, I'm giving you a second chance, a new life in the world of Game of Thrones. Maximus blinked. Game of Thrones? She grinned, sensing his recognition. Indeed, she continued. After scanning your memories, I found it to be an entertaining world, a place full of chaos, war, and opportunity. Her silver eyes bore into him. You were the son of two of the most brilliant minds of your old world. By 25, you had designed the most powerful weapon known to man and mastered countless skills and forms of combat. You were, in many ways, a demon among mortals. Maximus remained silent, processing what she was saying. But in this new world, she warned, her form beginning to fade, you are no longer Maximus, the genius son of Earth's brightest minds. You are no longer a walking god among men. She smirked as she vanished into nothingness. You are an ordinary man in an extraordinary world. And just like that, she was gone. The void around him shattered, and then came reality. A new beginning. A gust of wind rushed against Maximus's face. The rustling leaves and the scent of earth confirmed that he had, indeed, returned to the physical world. Then, a voice echoed inside his mind. System initialization. 20%, 40%, 60%, 80%, 100% complete. Greetings, Maximus. I am the kingdom-building system, assigned by the goddess to assist you in this world. Maximus's eyes widened. A system? His mind flashed back to the fanfictions he had read. Except now, he was in one. So, what exactly are your abilities? He asked. I provide missions that reward system points upon completion. Points can be spent on summoning troops, purchasing structures, acquiring advanced technology, and obtaining resources. Summoned troops will come from the mythologies and fictions of your previous world. They will possess loyalty but retain their personalities and emotions, Mistreatment could lead to rebellion. Missions will include objectives such as eliminating threats, capturing settlements, or achieving strategic goals. Each mission has a reward for success and a penalty for failure. Maximus absorbed the information, feeling a mix of excitement and anticipation. Then, another notification appeared. The goddess has left you a starter pack. Would you like to accept? Yes, no. Maximus snorted. Who would say no to free rewards? He selected yes. Starter pack accepted. Distributing rewards. Rewards. 6x Roman Praetorian Guards. 10,000 system points. Maximus's eyes lit up. Praetorian Guards? The most elite warriors of the Roman Empire. Now his. How do I summon them? He asked. Focus your mind on where you want them to appear. Maximus concentrated. A surge of warm energy coursed through him, and then silver light flared before him. In an instant, 6 armored warriors knelt before him. Their black and purple Praetorian armor gleamed, their gladius swords planted into the ground as they saluted. My lord, we are yours to command. Maximus exhaled sharply. Rise. The soldiers stood, their armor clinking with emotion. 2 of you, scout the area. The rest, remain here. 2 guards bowed before swiftly departing into the trees. Maximus turned back to the system store, searching for armor. He found a black chest plate and a long coat, both suitable for the cold air. He also purchased a simple longsword. System points remaining, 9,550. Next, he explored the army section of the system. His eyes gleamed as he found troops from fiction and history, including Lord of the Rings, Warhammer, and Total War units. One unit caught his eye, Gundor Infantry, costing 50 system points per soldier. Not a bad deal. However, before he could purchase more troops, a warning flashed across his vision. Warning! This world is more dangerous than you know. Magic exists, powerful entities move in the shadows, and threats lurk beyond mortal comprehension. Maximus's expression hardened. He needed to tread carefully. System, where am I? You are in Essos, between the forest of Qohor and V's Dothrak. The year is 5 years before Ares II Targaryens fall. Maximus inhaled sharply. This was not an ideal location. Too close to the Dothraki, a race infamous for raiding and slaughtering outsiders. Still, there was opportunity and danger. He smiled. Let's begin. The journey to Qohor lasted an entire day. When the distant city walls finally came into view, Maximus guided his group to the edge of the forest, where they secured their horses. Taking 3 Praetorian guards with him, he left the others behind to watch over their mounts. Together, they approached the main gate, where a long line of travelers, merchants, and sellswords waited for entry. As they queued, murmurs spread through the crowd. The sight of the Praetorian guards, with their black and purple armor, crested helmets, and imposing shields, was unlike anything seen before in this world. Their presence drew intrigued whispers and cautious stares. After a short wait, they were granted entry without issue. First steps into Qohor. The moment they stepped inside, a system notification flashed before Maximus's eyes. First city discovered. Reward, 10,000 Qohor coins. A pouch materialized in his hand. Feeling its weight, Maximus secured it to his hip and continued forward with his Praetorians. As they walked, onlookers watched with curiosity, many fascinated by their foreign armor and disciplined demeanor. Maximus, however, was more focused on observing the city. Qohor, like many medieval settlements, had crumbling roads, poor sanitation, and signs of wealth disparity. He saw beggars, merchants haggling, and soldiers patrolling with lax discipline. He couldn't help but think how easily improvement could be made, not just for profit, but for comfort. If he was to build something great in this world, he had to start somewhere. As they navigated the bustling streets, a well-dressed man, flanked by armed guards, approached them. A merchant's proposal. Sir, are you mercenaries? The man asked. Maximus raised an eyebrow. This seemed like an opportunity to gather information. Yes, he answered without hesitation. We are mercenaries. The man's expression brightened. Fantastic. I am Jacaro Megyrus, a merchant. I am planning to travel to Volantis to conduct business, and I require an escort for my caravan. It seems fate has smiled upon us today. Maximus remained thoughtful. Joining a trading caravan would provide valuable information about the world and allow him to expand his network. We accept your offer, Maximus finally said. But understand, our protection does not come cheap. Jacaro let out a hearty laugh. A mercenary who knows the worth of his sword. I respect that spirit. He gestured to one of his guards, who stepped forward, presenting a small chest. I hope this advance payment of 5,000 cohort coins serves as a token of my sincerity. A new system message appeared. Quest acquired. Escort merchant to Volantis. Reward: 20,000 cohort coins upon safe arrival. Plus 20 Roman legionary summons. Plus 10,000 system points. Maximus nodded in agreement, securing the deal. Excellent. Jacaro clapped his hands. We depart at dawn tomorrow. Meet me at the city gates. Night in Cohor. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Maximus and his Praetorians retreated into the city's alleys, eventually arriving at a local tavern. The patrons eyed them curiously, but kept their distance. Maximus took the opportunity to learn more about Volantis, purchasing an information scroll from the system store for 100 system points. The scroll revealed, Volantis is the oldest and southernmost of the free cities. It is governed by the Triarchs, powerful ruling figures. The city still reveres the Valyrian way, favoring pure-blood Valyrians. It controls key trade routes, making it a wealthy yet politically tense city. After reviewing the details, Maximus decided to rest. Tomorrow, a new journey awaited, through the Dothraki Sea. At dawn, Maximus and his men arrived at the city gates, where Jacaro's caravan awaited. A dozen wagons were loaded with silks, spices, and goods, ready for transport to Volantis' bustling markets. They were joined by a motley crew of sellswords, whose lack of discipline was glaringly obvious. Unlike his highly trained Praetorians, these men seemed more interested in talking than guarding. Jacaro approached, pointing at a hastily drawn map. Our route takes us through the Dothraki Sea. It is the quickest path, but also risky. Maximus memorized key landmarks, mentally preparing for any encounters with the horse lords. With the group assembled, they set off, leaving Cohor behind. Trials on the road. The journey was long and grueling. The sun scorched them by day. Cold winds howled at night. Wild animals prowled the darkness. The Praetorians, ever vigilant, protected the caravan against multiple attacks from bandits and beasts. Each time, the Praetorians' discipline and tactics easily crushed their enemies. Unlike the other mercenaries, who fought wildly and inefficiently, Maximus's men displayed superior combat training. Word of their prowess quickly spread among the caravan. Encounter with the Dothraki. One evening, they stumbled upon a nomadic Dothraki tribe, a Khalasar, setting up camp. Tensions rose. The Dothraki warriors watched them with predatory interest. But Jacaro, unfazed, approached them with gifts of wine and food, a gesture of peace and respect among the horse lords. Maximus observed carefully, studying the Dothraki customs in case conflict arose. During their time together, Jacaro shared valuable insights into the culture and politics of the free cities, believing Maximus to be a Westerosi traveler seeking fortune in Essos. Weeks passed like this, and finally, Volantis appeared on the horizon. Arrival in Volantis. The massive triple walls of Volantis loomed in the distance. Jacaro breathed a sigh of relief, while Maximus took in the sight of the ancient Valyrian stronghold, where the mighty Rhine River met the summer sea. As soon as they passed through the city gates, Jacaro fulfilled his payment, handing Maximus another 5,000 cohort coins. Before parting ways, the merchant expressed his interest in hiring Maximus again in the future. Then, a final system notification appeared. Quest completed. Escort merchant to Volantis. Reward: 20,000 cohort coins. Plus 20 Roman legionary summons. Plus 10,000 system points. Building an army. Inside his inventory, a small pouch contained his coins, seemingly endless in storage capacity. His true reward, however, was the 20 Roman legionaries. A legionary was a citizen soldier of Rome, serving 25 years before retirement. Maximus grinned. The thought of Roman legions marching across Essos and Westeros, alongside fantasy warriors, was a vision of power he fully intended to bring to life. His system points had also grown to 19,450, enough to summon 389 Gondor infantry, though he held off for now. For now, he needed to gather more intelligence. Next, moves in Volantis. Exploring the ancient city, Maximus found it filled with powerful factions, political intrigue, and hidden dangers. Thanks to his system, he understood the local languages effortlessly, making communication seamless. After gathering information, he rented rooms at a reputable tavern, letting his men rest after the long journey. Tomorrow, he would decide his next move. This world was ripe for the taking, and Maximus had only just begun.
Hey, welcome to Firescale Audiobooks. If you enjoy our audiobooks, please consider subscribing to the channel. Also, feel free to share your review in the comments section below.
After waking up the next morning and having breakfast, Maximus had come up with what to do next. He planned to start a business that would start out as a simple tavern or pub, then eventually develop into a massive trading organization so that he would be able to have a steady flow of money coming in to finance his future plans. It was obvious what he was going to do, as he was granted the kingdom building system by the goddess, so naturally, he would go down the path of conquest and form his own kingdom or empire in this world. So, to get started, he sought out Jacaro, whom he had found near the central part of the city. As he approached him, Jacaro turned towards him and smiled. "Maximus, how are you doing?" asked Jacaro. "I'm doing great. The city is as amazing as you said it was," responded Maximus. "That's good to hear. Now tell me what brings you here," asked Jacaro, as he knew that the two of them meeting was of no coincidence. "I was wondering if you knew of some suitable locations within the city, something big enough for a tavern, but with potential for expansion," Maximus replied. His words were met with intrigue from Jacaro. "Ah, so this is your strategy," he said, his grin wide and knowing. "Yes, it's a long-term plan, one that would allow me to set up a business in Volantis," Maximus said confidently. Jacaro laughed heartily and clapped Maximus on the back. "I like your spirit, lad. It's not every day you meet someone willing to strive for such grandeur." After a few moments of contemplation, he motioned for Maximus to follow him. They walked through the bustling city streets, Jacaro greeting various vendors and townsfolk as they went along. After a while, they arrived at a large, run-down establishment in the corner of a busy intersection. It was 2 stories high and had a large open space on the ground floor. Maximus could see the potential in the place. It looked run down, but with some work, it could be the perfect location to transform into his base. Jacaro turned to Maximus and gestured at the building with a flourish. This used to be one of Volantis' most popular taverns, until its owner passed away a few years back. Since then, it's been vacant, waiting for someone with the vision to restore its former glory. "It's perfect," Maximus murmured under his breath. The bottom floor could be turned into a pub, where people could come and sit inside and enjoy food, alcohol, and entertainment. The second floor could be remodeled into residential quarters for employees or a high-end inn for guests. Maximus could see the place being transformed into a popular location. "I can see the spark in your eyes, lad," Jacaro chuckled. "This is what you wanted, isn't it?" Maximus nodded. "Yes, this is exactly what I had in mind." "Good," Jacaro replied. "I can help with negotiations to get the building and even arrange some trustworthy workers to help restore it, if you'd like." "That's all right. You've helped enough. I'll find a way to restore this place," Maximus stated. He had a system that he could use to buy construction workers. His reasoning for doing this was that he knew that the people that Jacaro would use would not be cheap, nor would they be loyal to him. And he was sure that the design for the pub that he wanted would not be able to be constructed by the slaves that he knew Jacaro would use. "Suit yourself," Jacaro said. "I'll be looking forward to seeing what you make of this place," said Jacaro as he left to finish his business. The following day, Jacaro had successfully negotiated to buy the building for 5,000 coins. Maximus agreed to this amount, and had paid the 5,000 coins for the building. Once he bought it, he had received a system mission. Quest: restore the pub and turn it into a proper base. Rewards: 1x powerful character summon. 10,000 system points. Seeing the new mission and its rewards, Maximus was intrigued about what type of powerful character he would get. With that in mind, he focused on buying the construction workers for restoring the pub. As he browsed the system, he found some stonemasons and carpenters that cost 5 system points for each stonemason and carpenter, with an additional 10 system points to buy the necessary equipment that they would need. In addition to that, he could buy the materials that they would need to construct the pub for a total of 800 system points. Maximus brought 40 stonemasons and 20 carpenters along with their equipment for a total of 900 system points. He also bought the materials needed for 800 system points and stored them within the pub to keep from any prying eyes outside of the pub, leaving him with 17,750 system points. He summoned the 60 people 10 at a time within the pub and shared with them what their task was and how he wanted the new pub to look. The stonemasons and carpenters made sure to remember all that needed to be done, while also offering a few tips for other improvements. Once that was done, the group waited until the next day to start working on the pub. Just in case they got questioned on how they got there, Maximus could use the excuse of bringing them in during the night. The stonemasons worked on the building's exterior, repairing cracks and improving its overall look. The carpenters focused on the interior, reconstructing the worn-out bar counter into a grander and more exquisite one, and refurbishing the upper-floor residential quarters into comfortable living spaces. As the days passed by, the stonemasons and carpenters worked on during the day on the building, while during the night they slept within upper floor. Some had to share rooms. They didn't have a problem with sleeping there, as they were kept well fed and were overall comfortable. As the weeks passed, the renovations were beginning to take shape. The exterior of the building was now clean and appealing, with fresh paint. The interior of the tavern was nothing short of grandeur, with polished counters, comfortable seating areas, and a stage for nightly entertainment. The top floor had been renovated into cozy living quarters for employees, but with an added touch, a few luxurious rooms that could be rented out to wealthy patrons. Maximus had seen this as a way of further ensuring a constant flow of income. News of a new tavern that was being built spread throughout Volantis, drawing curious onlookers and potential patrons who were eager to see the new establishment. Maximus capitalized on this interest by advertising an opening night party where all would be welcome. The opening night party was planned to be a spectacle, one that would help establish the reputation of his establishment. Maximus bought chefs from the system and arranged for food and drinks of the finest quality to be served, and bought some musicians along with their instruments to provide lively entertainment. Once the tavern was fully established, he completed his quest and received his rewards of 1x powerful character summon, 10,000 system points. The powerful character summon that he received was a character named Aaron, who had some great skills and abilities that Maximus could use in this moment. Name: Aaron, no house name. Skills/abilities: Skill Manager, Persuasive, Charming, High Intelligence, Master Swordsman, One-Handed, Fast Regeneration, Quick Reflexes. Aaron looked to be in his mid-30s and was wearing some exquisite light armor that gave him the appearance of a wealthy person. Aaron's image here. Maximus was glad that he summoned Aaron, as this was exactly whom he needs right now. Somebody who could handle his business for him while he traveled to the other free cities. Within his room on the top floor of the tavern, Aaron had appeared in front of Maximus, kneeling on one knee. "My lord, I am yours to command." Maximus looked down at the kneeling figure and nodded, extending a hand to pull Aaron to his feet. "Rise, Aaron. I am Maximus, and we will be working closely for the foreseeable future, so please call me Maximus." Aaron rose, his eyes taking in every detail of his new environment. "What are my duties, Maximus?" he asked. "I need you to manage this establishment," Maximus said, as he took Aaron downstairs to see the tavern. "I won't be here all the time. I plan to travel to other cities in the future and will leave the business in your capable hands." "Will you also create taverns in those cities as well?" asked Aaron. Hearing his question, Maximus smiled, since he did in fact plan to establish one of his taverns in each free city and eventually in Westeros as well. Yes, Maximus confirmed, a spark in his eyes. This is only the beginning, Aaron. I want to create a network of taverns, each as grand and glorious as this one here. And you, Aaron, will be the one holding everything together. Aaron nodded, taking on the weight of responsibility with grace and composure. I understand, Maximus. You can trust me on this. Feeling relief at Aaron's words, Maximus could see that with a capable manager like him at the helm of his first establishment, he would be free to move forward with his plans for eventually creating his own empire in this world. He had thought long and hard about whether he wanted to establish a kingdom or an empire, and finally decided to establish an empire. The days leading up to the grand opening passed in a blur of activity. The buzz around Volantis grew louder as word spread about the luxurious new tavern that was soon to open its doors. People from all walks of life were intrigued, from merchants and traders looking for a new place to unwind after a hard day's work to the nobles seeking a new locale to discuss their clandestine affairs. The upper class were enticed by whispers of the opulent rooms available on the top floor, while the commoners were attracted by the promise of hearty meals and merry entertainment. And while he didn't like the idea of slavery, there was nothing that he could do now to change how people were treated in Essos. Instead, he opted to take advantage of by some slaves to use as waitresses. While they would be considered as slaves, in his eyes, they would be free people who were simply working for them. They will be provided with all their needs and eventually receive some education, as Maximus wanted them to be smart and knowledgeable about certain things. In this time, he had also purchased another building close to his current one, which would be where the staff of his tavern lived. The Praetorian guards that he originally got would be the guards of both the tavern and the residence building. However, they weren't enough, so he summoned the 20x Roman legionaries that he was rewarded to make up for this. These new additions were instantly dispatched to their roles. The Praetorian guards would remain with Maximus as his guards, while the Roman legionaries would be in charge of protecting the tavern and the staff residential building. Maximus wanted a trouble to befall his establishments, not while he was still setting his roots in Volantis. The day of the grand opening arrived amid much anticipation. From the early hours of the morning, a crowd had already begun gathering outside the building. Maximus had taken off his armor and coat and had just worn his suit, which would surely catch the attention of most of the people in the tavern, as a suit was something that was not invented yet within this world. Meanwhile, Aaron was already speaking to the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice filling every corner of the room. "Welcome to Medusa's Gaze. I hope you enjoy your time spent here, and I assure you that we will leave no stone unturned to make sure you have an unforgettable experience." His charismatic words ignited excited murmurs among the crowd, and applause broke out after Aaron ended his speech. For the next few hours, the tavern was a flurry of activity. Waitresses, dressed in elegant uniforms, weaved through the crowd with trays of food and drinks. The food was made by chefs summoned from the system who had great masterclass skills in cooking, making the food and drinks exceptional and exquisite. Musicians on the stage played a range of tunes, from lively jigs to soulful ballads that had a few noble couples swaying on the makeshift dance floor. In a separate corner of the room, Aaron held court. His natural charm and wit drew many towards him. He conversed easily with patrons, answering their queries about the tavern or simply exchanging pleasantries. The crowd clearly loved him, his charismatic ability to put people at ease coming handy. Maximus watched it all from a distance, a satisfied smile playing on his lips. He mingled with his guests, shaking hands and making polite conversation. Some recognized him as the owner of this fine establishment, while others did not. Not that it mattered to Maximus. In another part of the tavern, the Roman legionaries stood guard. They were imposing figures in their armor, and they ensured that no one caused any trouble. The presence of these trained soldiers provided an extra sense of security and orderliness to the place, and the patrons appreciated it. Among the guests that evening were influential figures of Volantis. They marveled at the tavern, which was unlike anything they had ever seen. The rich tapestries hung on the walls, the gleaming wooden floors, and chandeliers created an atmosphere of warmth and grandeur. The night continued like this, as the profit that Maximus received was a tremendous amount for his first opening. Now that he had a place to provide him with a steady income, he could start increasing the size of his army and expand his business to other cities to make even more profit. Eventually, once the time was right, he would use the system to build a brand new city that would become his capital and the place he launches his military campaigns from. 1 year later, 279 AC, Maximus' plans were well underway. Medusa's Gaze has become a well-known name in Volantis, its reputation drawing crowds from near and far. The profits exceeded his expectations, enough to fund his further plans. With Aaron managing operations so efficiently, Maximus could focus on other things. About 6 months into the successful running of Medusa's Gaze, Maximus set off to Pintos with a troop of his Praetorian guards. Like Volantis, Pintos had its own charm and vigor, bustling with people, cultures, and businesses. Here he planned to open his second tavern, Poseidon's Trident. He purchased a grand building located near the heart of Pintos and began the refurbishments. The designs were similar to that of Medusa's Gaze, but carried subtle differences that gave it a distinct identity. Hints of blue throughout the decor to signify the waters of Poseidon. He also employed local staff for Poseidon's Trident, only using slaves when there was no other option and always giving them the chance to earn their freedom and better their lives. With the establishment of his second tavern, Maximus had received a reward of 10,000 system points, increasing his total to 34,250 and another legendary character summon. This time he had received a spymaster-like character. Name: Faraday, no house name. Skills/abilities: Master of Deception, skilled in bluff, disguise, and intimidate, allowing them to manipulate information and influence others to achieve their goals. Expert Observer, proficient in listen, sense motive, and spot, enabling them to gather intelligence, read people's intentions, and detect hidden dangers. Agile and stealthy, skilled in escape artist, hide, move silently, and sleight of hand, allowing them to evade detection and slip in and out of shadows. Network Weaver, able to gather information, rumors, and influence, creating a web of connections and misinformation to achieve their objectives. Shadow Walker, capable of moving unseen and unheard to strike from unexpected angles and exploit vulnerabilities. Master of small weapons, knives, daggers, short swords. After looking at Faraday's skills, a man had appeared in front of him, wearing lightly armored clothes with a cloak and a mask covering his face. Faraday image here. Faraday was immediately ordered to start setting up his intelligence network within Essos. Faraday didn't waste any time and had started gathering information within both Volantis and Pintos, while also preparing to spread to the other free cities. Within 6 months, Faraday had been instrumental in ensuring the smooth running of the taverns and acquiring crucial information about potential threats and business opportunities in both Volantis and Pintos. His network of influence was gradually expanding, and he was establishing routes across all the free cities. He had taken to rescuing slaves and turning them into loyal operatives who he trained from for months before he sent them on their first assignment. Once they completed their first assignment successfully, proving that they were ready to serve Maximus and his plans for the future, Faraday, with permission from Maximus, had created a secret organization called the Shadow Hand. The organization was comprised of freed slaves who were trained to be loyal to Maximus and educated to be able to complete their tasks. The Shadow Hand, by the end of the year, had successfully established a robust intelligence network across Essos. They provided crucial information about factions who were potential threats, economic situations in other cities, political climate, etc. In addition to this, Maximus himself had summoned a small army of 300 Gondor infantry, costing him 15,000 system points, decreasing his total to 19,250. With this small army, Maximus created a new Sellsword company known as the Storm Surge Legion. For the final 2 months of the year, the Storm Surge Legion was contracted by Mir to fight in the disputed lands against the Lys, who also hired a Sellsword's company. The Storm Surge Legion proved to be a formidable force. The Gundor infantry displayed a level of discipline and combat prowess that was not commonly seen among the Free Cities armies. They managed to drive back the rival company and secured a crucial strategic point for Myr. Their success in this campaign further boosted Maximus' reputation, despite him not fighting in any battles as he didn't have the skills for it. However, as the months went by, he became competent enough to fight in battles. As the second year, 280 AC, since his arrival began, Maximus continued to lead the Storm Surge Legion, earning money and system point from his system. Halfway through the year, he had earned some amazing new reward from the system, including some new skills/abilities. Name: Maximus, no house name. Skills/abilities. Modern knowledge. Has knowledge of a world more advanced than Game of Thrones. Blessed by a goddess, allowing for advanced skills and abilities. Master Swordsman. Damage resistance. Super healing. Wound to this person is instantly healed and allows for detached body parts to be reattached. Quick reflexes. With his new skills/abilities, he was able to lead the Storm Surge Legion from the front and prove himself a worthy commander, able to strategize and fight with equal prowess. Using the knowledge of historical battles from his previous life, his reputation had soared within the Free Cities. He made sure that his men knew that he would never ask them to undertake a task that he wouldn't do himself. In addition to his new skills/abilities, Maximus had also received a different type of character summon this time around. He had received a general character summon, which he could either design himself or have it randomly selected. Maximus chose it to be randomly selected, and when the name of the character popped up, he was surprised at who it was: Alexander the Great. Maximus knew the reputation of the legendary Greek king, a master strategist, undefeated in battle, and conqueror of much of the known world. His skills were impressive, and now he would become a great general whom Maximus would be able to use. Name: Alexander, no house name. Skills/abilities. Brilliant tactician, able to conceive of, fine-tune, and execute expert strategies during wartime. Master of phalanx formation. Charismatic leader, inspired loyalty, commitment, and morale among troops. Expert rider, skilled in horseback riding and combat. Weapon expertise, proficient in all forms of melee weapons. Alexander materialized before him, armed with his signature shield and Sarissa pike. He looked much like historical records had described him. Auburn hair, sharp eyes, a charismatic aura that was undeniable. Alexander stood ready to serve Maximus. With Alexander on his side, Maximus felt unstoppable. Alexander immediately came up with strategies to strengthen their foothold in the disputed lands. They launched campaigns against the rival companies hired by Lys, winning every single one of them. At the same time, Aaron and Faraday had worked together and managed to expand Maximus's business to every city within the Free Cities. Any rivals or competitors were silently taken care of, as Faraday and the Shadow Hand had influence within every free city. Now, they were starting to expand their reach into Westeros. They would first start in King's Landing and then spread to the other major cities, castles, and towns from there. Maximus was close to starting stage 2 of his plan, which involved him creating his own city. With Alexander being summoned, it gave Maximus a lot of freedom to start traveling the free cities and to Westeros. He was currently in Myr and had purchased a ship to head to King's Landing, where he would start setting up his new tavern and spy network. Coming with him was Faraday and a handful of the Shadow operatives to oversee this crucial expansion, as well as a man named Merario Assaner, who was sent by Aaron to become the new manager for the tavern. 4 days later, they had arrived at King's Landing under the guise of wealthy merchants looking to establish new trade routes. As soon as he was about to venture into the city, Faraday had walked up to him. "My lord, Lord Varys appears to be waiting for you up ahead," informed Faraday. Looking in front of them, Maximus saw Varys standing next to a nearby building within its shadow. "I'm sure his little birds have told him about our arrival. I'll go speak with him. Just watch the area for any problems, ordered Maximus as he walked towards Varys, leaving his guards behind. Varys, the bald eunuch, was dressed in a robe of lavish cloth. He had a distinct placidity about him, his eyes calm, yet unreadable. "My lord Maximus, I've heard much of your exploits within free cities." Varys greeted him with an enigmatic smile. "I trust your voyage across the narrow sea brought no inconvenience." "No more than usual, Lord Varys," Maximus responded evenly. Varys nodded and gestured towards a private corner away from prying eyes. "I'm not here to impose, my lord. I am just curious as to why such as yourself have ventured across the narrow sea to King's Landing." "I simply seek opportunities, Lord Varys," Maximus responded, his eyes meeting those of Lord Varys. "I'm sure you know of my many establishments within the free cities. I seek to establish one in King's Landing to provide both the common folk and lords access to some interesting foods, drinks, and entertainment," revealed Maximus. He knew Varys already knew about his business, as he didn't try to keep it a secret. As long as one searched deep enough or asked some nobles, they would find out that Maximus is the owner of those new taverns in each of the free cities. And someone like Varys who had access to a large spy network could find out easily. "Indeed," Varys replied, having no surprise at the revelation. "A noble endeavor, my lord. Providing services and delights to the people of this city is always met with approval. Although I must remind you that Westeros is not the free cities," he paused. "The rules are different, and the power dynamics shift more rapidly than the seas during a storm." Maximus chuckled lightly. "I am no stranger to challenges, Lord Varys. They make life much more interesting." Varys smiled at the response, a knowing glimmer in his eyes. "Indeed they do," he replied. "Very well. Welcome to King's Landing, Lord Maximus. But I would advise you to tread carefully. I will, Lord Varys. And before you go, I must tell you that I have something interesting that you can give the king," informed Maximus. "And what do you think is something that the king will be interested in?" inquired Lord Varys. "Well," Maximus began, lowering his voice to a whisper. A wry smirk appeared on his lips as he took a step closer to Lord Varys. "I have in my possession a rare vintage of wine from Essos. It's called Illyrio's Fire, aged for over 5 decades and known for its rich, fiery flavor. I only have a few bottles, and I thought the king might appreciate such a rarity." Varys' eyebrows shot up at the mention of Illyrio's Fire. Even he, with all his access and connections, had only heard rumors of such a vintage. To actually possess it was quite an achievement. Indeed, his voice betrayed a hint of intrigue. "The king does have an appreciation for fine wines. And this is certainly no ordinary wine." Maximus nodded. "Consider it a gift from me to the crown, a token of goodwill, and inform the king that I have a way to ensure that his wife never has a stillborn child again and his son's life will never be in danger," Maximus offered with a respectful bow of his head. Varys bowed slightly, a thin smile curving his lips. "A generous offer, my lord. The king will be most pleased." He hesitated for a moment and then added, "Is there anything else you require from me before I take my leave?" Maximus shook his head. "Not at the moment, Lord Varys, but I am sure our paths will cross again soon." "I am certain of it," replied Varys, offering a final nod before turning to disappear back into the shadowy maze of King's Landing. Once Varys was out of sight, Maximus heaved a sigh. The meeting had gone as well as he could have hoped for now. It was only the first step in his grand plan. King's Landing was ripe with opportunities and dangers alike. Only time would tell if he had played his cards right. He planned to gain the Mad King's favor and trust in order to be able to meet the Queen. Once that happens, then he would be able to save her alongside her children when the rebellion happens. As he began to direct his men towards their new establishment, which Faraday had already procured before they arrived, Merario, as Saner, approached him. He was a tall man, with ebony hair and a slender build that hid his strength. "My lord," he began, "I've managed to secure some hires for the tavern while you were speaking with Varys. We should be able to start operations by tomorrow night." Maximus gave him an approving nod. "Good work, Merario. Once everything is set up, we can start renovating the place and eventually open it." Merario straightened with a satisfied grin. "I won't disappoint you, my lord. Our tavern shall be the talk of King's Landing." And with that, they parted ways, Merario to oversee the last-minute preparation for the tavern, and Maximus set off to visit the property and see what needs to be done. As Maximus stepped into the building that was soon to become the most popular tavern in King's Landing, his eyes evaluated the space. It was well located, and while it needed some work to align with his vision, it had potential. High ceilings, ample room for tables and chairs, a large bar area, and a generous space for a stage where musicians or performers could entertain guests. The renovations would take some time, but he was not in a rush. He knew that a well-designed and comfortable tavern could lure in both highborn lords looking for refined entertainment, as well as commoners who sought a place to unwind after a hard day. As he walked around the place, inspecting every corner, Maximus formulated plans. He wanted to create an atmosphere unlike any other in King's Landing. The furnishings would be luxurious, but welcoming. Fine art from Essos would adorn the walls. And of course, there would be a private room reserved only for special guests, highborns or wealthy merchants with a taste for exclusivity and privacy. His designs for his bar were mostly based off his modern knowledge, which in this world would make it look unique compared to other taverns and places of interest. The stonemasons and carpenters took his words and created a plan to renovate the area. Once he was done planning the renovations of the tavern, Maximus took 2 guards and explored the rest of King's Landing. When the next day arrived, Maximus was greeted by Lord Varys at the entrance of his tavern. The carpenters and stonemasons had already started working on the renovations of the tavern. Maximus invited Lord Varys in as he led him to a corner of the tavern to hear what Lord Varys had to say. "Quite an ambitious undertaking, my lord," Varys commented, his eyes scanning the half-constructed stage and bar area. "This will undoubtedly become quite the attraction in King's Landing." Maximus merely chuckled in response. "That is the plan, Lord Varys. An establishment unlike any other, somewhere everyone can find something to their liking." Varys nodded appreciatively before passing on a sealed letter bearing the royal seal. "From a king," he said simply. Maximus took and opened the letter carefully. His eyebrows rose as he read its contents. "His Grace wishes to meet me." "Yes, Lord Maximus," Varys confirmed with a smirk. "It seems your generous gift has intrigued him sufficiently." "A meeting with King Ares was sooner than I anticipated," Maximus admitted, not revealing any hint of concern. He handed the letter back to Varys and continued, "I trust he is." "Well, indeed," Varys replied cryptically. "The king is as well as can be expected. He has his good days and his not-so-good days." "I see," said Maximus, understanding what Varys was not saying. He knew all too well the mad tendencies of King Ares. "Well then, I suppose this will be an interesting endeavor." Varys simply inclined his head, a small smile playing on his lips. "Indeed, Lord Maximus, I recommend you tread carefully in your dealings with his grace." Varys paused for a moment, his gaze straying to the ongoing work around them. "If you would like, my lord, we can go now," suggested Varys. "Very well," Maximus agreed. He instructed one of his men to inform Merario of his departure and then followed Varys out, leaving behind his guards. As they made their way through the winding streets of King's Landing towards the Red Keep, Maximus was observing their surroundings, looking at the current state of the city under the Mad King's rule, the desperate faces of the beggars on the street corners, the squalid conditions in the poorest quarters, the hollow-eyed children stealing scraps from market stalls. He could see the simmering discontent and could almost smell the revolt in the air. However, as they moved closer to the Red Keep, the luscious gardens and impressive architecture told a different story of privilege, affluence, and power. Maximus noted with interest how King Ares lived in oblivious luxury while his people wallowed in poverty. It was a recurring occurrence in both his past and present life. The wealthy and powerful occupied the highest echelons of society, while those at the very bottom continued to struggle with basic needs such as food and shelter, only able to scrape by through subservience to the upper class. Of course, It wasn't always the upper class who was at fault, as sometimes it's the common people who cause more problems for themselves. Upon arriving at the Red Keep, they were escorted to a private chamber where King Aerys sat. The room was vast and opulent, decorated with rich tapestries depicting past Targaryen victories. The air was heavy with the scent of exotic incense burning in golden braziers. At the far end of the chamber, seated behind a desk, was King Aerys himself. "Lord Maximus," he said in a soft voice, "you honor me with your presence." Maximus slightly bowed before the king, as right now he was a simple lord and didn't hold much power within Westeros as of yet. However, money was a powerful influencer, and he had a lot of it. "Your Grace," he greeted, rising to meet the eyes of the Mad King. "The honor is mine." "Indeed," he replied as he gestured toward a chair across from him. "Please have a seat." Varys retreated subtly into the background as Maximus sat down opposite the Mad King. "Let's get straight to the point, Lord Maximus," stated King Aerys. "You say you have a way to ensure that my wife never has a stillborn child again, and my son's life will never be in danger. I am curious how someone like you will ensure that." Maintaining eye contact, Maximus responded calmly. "Your Grace, I come from a land far to the east of Essos, where medicine and alchemy have advanced significantly. There, we have potions and treatments that help ensure the health of a child in the womb and protect them from many dangers even after they are born." This was a lie, of course, as Maximus was referring to the system in this case. His only plan for doing this was to simply save both Viserys and Daenerys during the rebellion. While he had no moral obligation to save them, they would be a major motivator for his future invasion of Westeros to reclaim their former seat in King's Landing. Once he rescued them, naturally he would have them raised and trained up to be capable of warrior, leader, and ruler. As of now, he had no plans to take over Westeros as his focus was on Essos, but he was sure that in the future that would change. The king's eyes widened in surprise, and a flicker of hope crossed his face. "Is such a thing possible?" he asked, clearly intrigued. Maximus nodded. "It is, Your Grace. I can import these remedies for Her Grace the Queen and Prince Rhaegar." The Mad King looked at him with suspicion in his eyes. "And what do you want in return?" Maximus met the Mad King's gaze. "For now, nothing, Your Grace. My desire is to just build my tavern within the city. And of course, the assurance that my businesses will remain untouched by unnecessary scrutiny or taxation." King Aerys regarded Maximus silently for a moment before bursting into loud, unhinged laughter. He understood well enough that this was no ordinary monarch. He was dealing with a man termed the Mad King, after all. However, madness or not, Aerys was still the king and held immense power. "Well spoken, Lord Maximus, well spoken indeed," King Aerys finally said, his laughter tapering off into occasional chuckles. He leaned forward across the table. His eyes had an indefinable spark. "I accept your terms," he announced in a low growl. "Bring me these remedies you speak of, and in return I shall assure you that your businesses will be free from royal interference." Maximus bowed his head in acknowledgement. "Thank you, Your Grace." "However," King Aerys added, his voice low and dangerous, "if you are lying or your methods fail, you will pay for it dearly." There was a mad glint in his eyes that sent a shiver down Maximus's spine. He knew the king had a fondness for fire, and he didn't plan on ending up as another one of Aerys' victims. "Rest assured, Your Grace," Maximus said smoothly, "I am not in the business of making empty promises. I shall deliver what I have promised." A sudden smile broke on King Aerys' face, replacing his previously menacing expression. "Good, good," he exclaimed, clapping his hands together with childlike enthusiasm. "I am eager to see these Eastern remedies of yours." Varys emerged from the shadows then, respectfully requesting to discuss certain matters with King Aerys. The change in topic seemed to please the king. He turned his attention to Varys and dismissed Maximus with a wave of his hand. As he left the Red Keep, he thought about how good his acting was. It seemed he had successfully planted the first seeds of his plan in the rocky soil of King's Landing. However, he had to tread carefully. Pleasing a Mad King was no easy task, and any misstep could cost him his life. But when he succeeds, then he would have gained the favor of the Mad King along with many other benefits. He wanted to start interacting with the many lords and ladies of the court to increase his influence and connections amongst the lords of Westeros. Following his meeting with the king, Maximus had bought a potion of fertility from the system shop. This potion would provide any female with ability give birth to healthy children while they themselves remained healthy during the childbirth, making their chance of dying go away. Next was the potion of vitality, which would give Prince Rhaegar increased vitality compared to the rest of the lord and ladies of Westeros. Each potion cost 10 system points, so Maximus brought 25 of both potions for a total of 500 system points. He waited 2 days before he brought 4 of each potion to King Aerys. Maximus could see that the king was still skeptical about these potions that he had given them, which is why he brought 4 of each to the king. One would be tested by the Grand Maester for poison or any other harmful substances. The other 3, Maximus explained, were for practical application, 1 each for the queen, the prince, and a spare. Aerys handed the potions over to the Grand Maester with a strained look of anticipation on his face, and Maximus observed them all being taken away with a hint of satisfaction. It was clear that the king was anxious for the results, holding on to hope as though it were his lifeline. 2 more days passed before the Grand Maester announced that the potions held no poison or ill effects, but he could not determine what exactly they would do to those who consumed them. Aerys wasted no time in offering the potions to Queen Rhaella and Prince Rhaegar. As weeks turned into months, the effects of the potions became clear. The queen, once often plagued by bouts of illness and miscarriages, was now seen glowing with good health. She was even rumored to be with child again. As for Prince Rhaegar, he too had seen improvements in his health. He was noticeably stronger and more robust. King Aerys' court soon began buzzing with whispers about the miraculous potions and the man who had brought them. Maximus throughout this time had ventured out to the other major cities in Westeros, leaving the management of the tavern to Merario while he explored the rest of the Westeros. First, he decided to visit the southern kingdoms, which included the Reach, Dorne, and Stormlands. His journey first led him to the Reach, the most fertile region of Westeros, ruled by House Tyrell from their seat at Highgarden. Here he met with Lord Mace Tyrell, a jovial and rotund man who enjoyed feasting more than warfare. Maximus impressed him with his fake tales of medicinal breakthroughs in Essos. His next stop was Dorne, a land as hot as it was striking, ruled by the Martells from their stronghold of Sunspear. Prince Doran Martell, a cautious and calculating man crippled by gout, met with Maximus. Intrigued by the potential of the remedies Maximus provided King Aerys, Doran proposed an alliance wherein Maximus would supply his medicinal potions to Dorne. In exchange, Maximus would receive protection and patronage for his businesses within Dorne. Naturally, he accepted as he had other ways to acquire potions. He could buy potion makers from his system to continuously produce potions and increase his income as he continued to establish himself. His business wouldn't simply stop at building taverns, but by also selling high-value items that were not common in the world. He also met with Prince Oberyn Martell, who talked to him about his taverns, which Prince Oberyn had visited during one of his many trips to Essos. Finally, Maximus journeyed to Storm's End, home of House Baratheon. Robert Baratheon boasted a formidable physique and was renowned for his love for wine and women. Robert was less interested in medical marvels than the previous lords, but was intrigued by the financial potential of such establishments within his domain, thus granting Maximus permission to operate businesses within Stormlands. Money was a powerful influencer, and no lord would deny wanting the opportunity to make more of it. Next, he was supposed to head back north and visit some of the northern cities of the Seven Kingdoms, but his time for being in Westeros was up. He returned to King's Landing and paid his respects to King Aerys and her Grace, who just had her second child, whom she named Jaehaerys. King Aerys had started to include Maximus in his small circle of people whom he trusted. It was an unusual feeling to be part of the small inner circle of a man as unpredictable as King Aerys. But Maximus knew better than to let his guard down despite the apparent trust the king had placed in him. After paying his respects, Maximus left King's Landing for Myr, where he would begin the next phase of his plan, establishing a city. First, he needed people, which the Dothraki had plenty of as slaves. Next would be to turn those slaves into proper people and instill loyalty within them. He planned to bring about an entirely new world and was going to start in Essos. As soon as he arrived, he received a ton of new quests relating to his goal of building himself an empire in Essos. Quest: have a standing army of at least 5,000 soldiers. Rewards: 15,000 system points. X 100 lawbringers. X 100 warmongers. X 100 black priors. Quest: find and claim a location for your empire's capital city. Rewards: 20,000 system points. X 1,000 stonemasons. X 500 carpenters. Quest: defeat all of the Dothraki hordes to increase your population and bring an end to the nomadic barbarians. Rewards: 40,000 system points. X1 dragon. X10 wyverns. And so, with his goals clearly laid out before him, Maximus is set out to Slavers Bay to buy some unsullied soldiers. This would complete his first quest, and it was also a part of his plan in the first place. Buying unsullied soldiers rather than spending system points was a much better trade, as he had more than enough gold to buy the 5,000 unsullied soldiers which he planned to get. The trip to Slavers Bay took 3 months before Maximus arrived at Astapor, also known as the Red City. Astapor is the southernmost of the slave cities in Slavers Bay and is renowned for their training of the unsullied. Once there, Maximus was greeted by Krasny's Naklas, a prominent slaver and trainer of the unsullied. Krasny's was a distasteful man with a cruel streak, but Maximus had not come to Astapor to make friends. He had come to buy soldiers. Their negotiations were quick and to the point. Krasny's was eager to sell, and Maximus had gold aplenty. Within a week, Maximus had brokered a deal for 5,000 unsullied soldiers to be placed in his care. The unsullied, renowned for their brutal discipline and unwavering obedience, made perfect foot soldiers for Maximus's army. Upon completing the transaction, the sound of the system dinged in his ear, telling him that he had completed the quest and received his rewards. Eager to summon his new soldiers, Maximus didn't take long before he left Astapor with his new unsullied army. Once they were some distance away, he halted the march of the unsullied and stood in front of them with the whip that was given to him by Krasny's Naklas. He tossed the whip on the ground and addressed the unsullied. "From this day forth, no man among you shall bear the chains of another," he began, his voice resonating across the silent ranks. "You are unsullied. You have been trained to be soldiers, not slaves. I did not buy you to own you. I bought you to free you." A murmur of confusion rippled through the ranks. The unsullied were not used to such words of freedom and choice. "If any among you wish to leave, consider your chains broken here and now," Maximus continued. "Go with my blessing. But if any of you wish to stay, know that you will fight not as slaves, but as free men, defenders of a city that will welcome you not as property, but as its protectors." He waited, gauging their reactions. To his surprise and satisfaction, none left. Instead, they stood resolute and attentive. Maximus nodded, seeing that they had made their choice. "Then, let us march onwards," he announced. "For a new dawn awaits us." In the days that followed, Maximus led his new army towards the Dothraki Sea, the Horse Lord's domain and his next target. His plan was simple: defeat the Dothraki hordes and claim their slaves for his empire's future city. Alexander was still commanding his 300 men within the disputed lands, as they were still contracted to fight with Myr. He didn't want to tarnish their reputation by abandoning a contract, especially when the contract only had 4 months left. Maximus already had Faraday inform Alexander that once the contract ends, he will join up with Maximus. Once they left Slavers Bay and crossed into the Dothraki Sea, Maximus had summoned the new soldiers that he had just received. The first was the lawbringers. They enforce the laws and dispense punishment and retribution without mercy. Their armor is without equal. Their signature weapon is a poleaxe, and it serves as a grim reminder of the ultimate punishment for lawlessness. The second was the warmongers. The warmongers are grandiose warriors who will not go unnoticed on the battlefield. Their weapon of choice is the Flamberge Greatsword, a two-handed sword that is as elegant as it is deadly. They also wield the power of corruption, which will allow them to deal damage to soldiers, while also healing their allies. Lastly were the Black Priors, a vanguard of Maximus's army, whose signature weapon is a long sword and a towering kite shield. They are tough knights, known for their resilience and the courage with which they defend their people. Each one is a force to be reckoned with, trained to strike fear into enemies not only with their combat skills, but also with their dark omens. With such powerful soldiers at his command, Maximus was confident in his chances against the Dothraki hordes. However, they were still outnumbered compared to the Dothraki and outmatched, as the Dothraki were all on horseback. So, he browsed the system to find something to make up for their low numbers. After a few minutes of browsing the system store, he found some expensive but powerful people whom he could summon. The first was a mayor, or wizard from Middle-earth. The mayor were primordial spirits created to help the Vala first shape the world. Mayor, as primordial spirit beings, are functionally immortal and essentially immune to the ravages of time. Even from physical destruction, they remain in spirit form. They can shape-shift if they so choose, and can utilize magic, thus giving them the ability to perform blessings, spells, curses, exorcism, etc. They can teleport vast distances, and by taking the form of a flying creature, they could also fly. Just to get one of these powerful beings costs 5,000 system points. As of now, Maximus had total of 33,750 system points, which was enough for him to buy 2 of these powerful beings, and use the rest to either buy more soldiers or save them for better time. Wasting no time, he bought 2 of them, leaving him with 23,750 points. He halted the unsullied march, and then summoned the 2 mayor. Out of thin air, 2 figures materialized, both clad in simple but distinguished robes, their eyes holding an ageless wisdom. One had hair as white as fresh snow, with a beard that reached his chest, bearing a staff topped with a crystal. The other was youthful with raven black hair, his eyes a brilliant blue that held an ethereal glow. Their names were Olorin and Ianwe. Olorin, known best for his love for all living things and his wisdom. Ianwe, herald of Manwë, the king of the Vala and mightiest in arms among them. Maximus stood before them in silence for a moment, taking in the sheer enormity of their presence. He then spoke, "Olorin and Ianwe of Mayor, it's a pleasure to have you with me," he stated as the 2 of them bowed their heads. "My lord, we are glad to be of service," said Ianwe. Olorin did the same thing, greeting Maximus as their lord. Maximus nodded in appreciation, feeling the weight of their commitment. He then turned his gaze back to the sea of unsullied soldiers, now mixed with lawbringers, warmongers, and black priors. His army was complete. He had a mix of discipline, strength, corruption, defense, and now magic on his side. "Prepare yourselves," Maximus instructed his new army. "The Dothraki horde awaits us. Soon we shall meet them on the field of battle." His words were met with a wave of affirmations from his soldiers, their bodies stiffening with anticipation. As they resumed their march across the Dothraki Sea, Maximus could not help but feel excited at seeing his army march. The Dothraki were known for their ferocious fighting style and fearsome reputation. But Maximus had faith in his army, which had superior soldiers and magic on their side. Days turned into nights, and nights back into days, as they ventured deeper into the Dothraki territory. One evening while camped for the night, Maximus summoned Olorin and Ianwe to his tent. He wished to understand more about these beings who hailed from Middle-earth. The 2 mayor materialized before him. Their appearances were humble, and yet there was an undeniable aura of power around them. "Olorin, Ianwe," Maximus began, "I wish to know more about your capabilities, your strengths. Tell me of the knowledge you possess." Olorin, the elder of the 2, spoke first. "Our strengths lie in our spiritual manifestation and abilities we hold. We possess vast knowledge in magic and warfare," he said confidently. Ianwe, the younger, chimed in. "We are spirits, my lord. spirits of the earth and sky, of wind and fire. We are not bound by physical limitations. Our magic is potent, able to heal injuries or create barriers against enemy attacks. We can shapeshift into creatures or even elements. If need be, teleport over vast distances and bestow blessings or curses in accordance with our will. Allerin added, his voice a soft rumble like distant thunder. Furthermore, our wisdom spans eons, and we have seen many wars, many battles. Maximus listened attentively, nodding at their words. Their abilities exceeded his expectations, and their knowledge of warfare could prove invaluable against the Dothraki. What about weaknesses? Maximus asked after a moment of consideration. The two mayors shared a glance before Ianwe spoke. We are not invulnerable, my lord. Although we can reform after our physical form is destroyed, it takes time for us to regain our full strength. And powerful magical attacks can harm us. Allerin added with a serious expression. More than that, we cannot forcefully shape the will of others or resurrect the dead. Maximus nodded, taking this all in. He appreciated their honesty and felt even more confident in having them by his side. With them present, Maximus used the remainder of the night to strategize for the upcoming battle against the Dothraki. Days passed uneventfully until one morning when a scout returned with news of a Dothraki's horde location. They were encamped near a river a day's march away, their numbers as immense as they had anticipated. Maximus' mind immediately began to spin strategies around this new information. A river could be used to their advantage, providing natural defenses that could help offset the greater numbers of the Dothraki. Instructing his forces to break camp, they set off. Allerin and Ianwe marched at the front, both wielding their weapons. Allerin was a pure mage, so he had his staff in hand, while Ianwe wielded a sword and was more of a frontline wizard than Allerin. As the sun began to set, they finally sighted the Dothraki camp sprawled alongside the river's edge. The Dothraki had also spotted him as the call began to sally out with his blood riders and the rest of the Dothraki horsemen. Allerin, Ianwe, called Maximus, prepare for battle. The two nodded and had begun taking positions at the head of the army. Within the army, the warmongers were given leadership positions within the army to better manage the Unsullied. They were familiar with the concept of war, and their experience will be indispensable in the upcoming battle. Maximus rode to the front, his eyes fixed on the horde of horsemen across the river. His heart pounded with exhilaration. This was a feeling he was familiar with, the feeling before a battle. "Hold steady," shouted Maximus, turning to his army. As the enemy horde grew closer, his army stood firm, their faces hidden behind their helmets, their bodies filled with determination and resolve. Maximus could see how they tightened their grip on their weapons, prepared to face the Dothraki horde. The Dothraki attacked first, a wave of horsemen galloping towards them like reckless savages. They charged forward, shouting fierce war cries, their curved swords and bows within their hands. "Allerin," Maximus called. Without hesitation, the elder mayor raised his staff. In response to his incantation, a barrier of light formed in front of their lines. The first wave of Dothraki crashed into it and were repelled back with an ethereal force that took them by surprise. "Advance," Maximus ordered. His soldiers moved forward in lockstep, a wall of shields and spears that marched inexorably toward the disoriented Dothraki. "Ianwe," Maximus shouted next. The youthful mayor stepped forward, wielding his sword with divine grace. A gust of wind erupted from his movements, sweeping across the open field and throwing off the balance of the incoming Dothraki riders. This was just the beginning. In close formation, his soldiers began their offensive, their spears colliding with the Dothraki riders who were knocked off of their horses. They continued to advance under the safeguard of Allerin's barrier. Their progress was slow but steady as they moved towards the river, the water lapping at their boots, but not breaking their march. And to see what it was. Above them, Ianwe shifted into an eagle and swooped down onto the Dothraki, his talons slashing through ranks. The Dothraki raised their bows to shoot him down, but Allerin created another barrier around Ianwe, deflecting arrows while allowing him to attack freely. The clever strategy startled the Dothraki, who were used to intimidating their enemies with sheer numbers and raw ferocity. Meanwhile, Maximus had joined the front lines with his troops and began fighting against the Dothraki riders. With every swing of his sword, a Dothraki who dared stand in his path was killed. Soon enough, fear had begun to spread throughout the Dothraki ranks, as the use of magic had caused them to become wary. They had expected a feast of easy prey, not war-hardened soldiers guided by powerful magi. Marauding horsemen tried to flank them, but each time they were pushed back by the unyielding ranks of the Unsullied, their spears forming an impenetrable wall. Any who broke through found themselves face-to-face with the terrifying lawbringers. From the sky, Ianwe let out an ear-piercing cry as he dived down once more upon the Dothraki. He then shifted into a huge bear, landing heavily amongst them and tearing them apart with razor-sharp claws. The Dothraki riders reeled in disarray, unable to maintain their earlier momentum. The Khal, who was part of the first wave of riders, was fighting on foot as he had been thrown off his horse by the barrier. He had managed to kill a few Unsullied alongside his blood riders, but now he was standing in front of Maximus alongside 10 Blackpriors. The Blackpriors had charged at the blood riders while Maximus and the Dothraki Khal faced each other. With a savage cry, the Khal attacked first. His arak slashed through the air with deadly precision, only to be met by Maximus's own weapon. Maximus used his agility and skills to parry every attack while launching some of his own. While the Khal was aggressive and relentless in his assault, he lacked the refined technique that Maximus had. Every wasted movement that the Khal made, Maximus exploited it. Every opening he saw, he took it. He kept striking the Khal in his arms and legs until the Khal could finally felt his knees. Walking up to the Khal, Maximus lined his sword up with his head and swung his sword with one final strike that separated the Khal's head from his body. Seeing this, the Dothraki riders fell into disarray, their leaderless horses scattering across the battlefield. The Blackpriors made quick work of the remaining blood riders, their heavy shields and flails proving superior against the lighter rocks. Maximus raised his sword high in victory as a roar erupted from his troops. He turned to see the bodies of the defeated Dothraki that covered the battlefield. Just from one look, one could see thousands of dead Dothraki soldiers on the battlefield. With the riders defeated, Maximus moved onto the Khalasar, where the remaining Dothraki riders had fled. Maximus ordered his army to surround them to prevent any from escaping as he came forward to address them. He rode his horse towards the remaining Dothraki as he saw the fear in their eyes, the feeling of being cornered without a leader, surrounded by an army that could very well kill the lot of them. "Dothraki," he yelled, his voice echoing through the battlefield. All eyes turned to him, their bodies tense as they awaited his words. "Your Khal is dead. Your blood riders have fallen." He gestured towards the lifeless bodies scattered across the field. His words were harsh but true. "You have two choices now, surrender or die," he said clearly, his voice leaving no room for misunderstanding. The reality of the situation seemed to sink in among the remaining Dothraki, murmurs of uncertainty and fear passing through their ranks. Some threw down their weapons immediately. Their Khal was dead, and they didn't have the means to beat the army in front of them who also had magi. Others hesitated, their pride wrestling with their survival instincts. They were warriors to the core. Every fiber of their being screamed against surrender. Maximus observed them all, waiting for the murmurs and whispers to die down. "Choose wisely," he said. One by one, the Dothraki dropped their weapons. There were still some who refused to surrender, but Olerin had used his staff and caused a shockwave to spread throughout the Dothraki, which forced them down to their knees. "From now on, everybody here serves me and will have a much better life than before under the Khal's rule," Maximus announced, his voice resonating in the silent battlefield. "You can still live as warriors or live peacefully with your families, but under my rule." Seeing the overwhelming power of the Magi, the remaining Dothraki had no choice but to surrender. With the remaining Dothraki subdued and kneeling before him, Maximus signaled his soldiers to lower their weapons. Now that the battle was over, there were a lot of things that he needed to do, such as take account of the number of casualties for both sides, find out the exact number of people that were remaining within the horde, get the remaining Dothraki riders on his side, etc. There was a lot to do, but first he had completed a hidden mission, so he looked at assist. Sitting within his tent, Maximus was analyzing this new information that he had just received from a system. This newfound information was surprising, to say the least. To know that there are actually gods within the world was shocking, since he never knew or read about actual gods being in God. Besides the many religions that worship gods and the implications that there were beings a long time ago that may have been gods, he didn't think that they were real in this time period of the world. But now that he knew, he would need to tread careful, since while the system warned him about summoning magical entities to this world, he still needed to be wary of the other magical forces of the world, such as the Red Priests and the House of Black and White. As he was lost in thought, making adjustments to his future plans, Olerin had walked into his tent and bowed his head slightly. "My lord," he greeted. "The Dothraki are surprisingly well behaved, even though just yesterday we killed their call." Olerin had been curious about the Dothraki culture and had done some investigating by observing the Dothraki to better understand them. Well, mostly, there are a few Dothraki who are dissatisfied with this new arrangement, and I have reason to believe that they might try something if they get the chance, informed Olerin. Hearing this, an idea popped up in Maximus's head. Similar to how Daenerys got the Dothraki to be fiercely loyal to her, he thought to do the same thing to make them loyal to him. From what he knew, fire is highly revered in Dothraki culture. So, when Daenerys emerged unharmed from the burning Dash Khaleen temple, it shows the Dothraki that she has the favor and protection of the powerful Dothraki deity, the Great Stallion. By utilizing this information, Maximus could create a scenario where he emerged from within fire to make Dothraki believe that he had the favor and protection of the Great Stallion. "Actually, we could use them to our advantage," responded Maximus as Olerin had become curious as to what he had in mind. The Dothraki religion is a major influence in their culture and will be the main factor in securing their loyalty. The easiest way to use their religion is by setting up a display of divine favor. "We shall use those who don't like me as their call to start a bonfire, one large enough to be seen for miles. While it blazes, I shall emerge unscathed from it, demonstrating that the Great Stallion has blessed me." Within his head, the scene of him emerging from the fire was playing, and he knew that it was a sure way to secure their loyalty. "A masterful scheme indeed," he admitted, "and I'm assuming that you will need my help as you don't have any resistance to fire," asked Olerin. "Indeed. I hope that you have something to protect me while I am within the fire." "Yes, I do have a spell that can create a barrier of protection around you," Olerin replied. "For a short time the fire won't have any effect on you, but make sure to not stay in the fire too long, or I might have to come save you and spoil your plan." "Duly noted," Maximus replied with a small grin. For the next few hours, Maximus had decided to go over his current situation with Olerin and plan their next steps. As of now, he has a total of about 40k Dothraki whom he took from the previous call. About 5k of them are Dothraki riders, while the rest are women, children, elderly, and slaves. He had plans to eventually free the slaves, but right now the Dothraki don't see him as their leader, nor does he have enough authority over them to simply free all the slaves. Once he conquered more Khalasars and eventually united the Dothraki, then he would free the slaves. Once night had arrived, the plan had begun. Olerin casts illusions on the Dothraki who didn't like Maximus, making them believe that he was a threat to their traditions and would bring ruin to their way of life. They were filled with rage, accusing Maximus of crimes against their culture and insulting the Great Stallion. The malcontents, fueled by Olerin's carefully crafted illusions, had stealthily made their way towards Maximus's tent. For the plan to proceed, the guards around Maximus's tent were sent away, leaving Maximus alone inside of his tent. Once they arrived at the tent and found no guards, they started to set the place ablaze. Olerin cast the illusion that they had one of their pots of burning oil with them and used it to set the tent on fire. Slowly the fire spread as the wood and structural integrity of the tent started to fail. The fire grew brighter, which attracted a lot of attention from the camp as people started to gather around the tent to see what was going on. Maximus's army was confused and worried that their lord's tent was set ablaze. Some even tried to enter the tent and save Maximus, but Olerin had made the fire grow even more as they got closer. Inside, Maximus was standing in the middle of the tent, prepared to emerge from the tent after a few more seconds had passed. Once that time passed, he readied himself and emerged from the tent where everybody could see him. Olerin had cast an illusion spell on Maximus to make it appear like his clothes were tattered and burned from the fire, which managed to fool everybody present. Seeing Maximus walk out of the burning tent unscathed, a gasp spread through the crowd. The ferocious flames that had devoured the tent seemed to dance around Maximus, creating an almost ethereal halo of fire around him. Stepping away from the blazing remains of his tent, Maximus stood tall in front of the crowd of people, his face illuminated by the burning fire. There was an eerie silence in the camp as all eyes were fixated on him. Fear, awe, and respect filled their expressions. In their eyes, he was no longer just a call. This showing proved that he was chosen and blessed by the great stallion. A murmur of disbelief rolled through the crowd, and then a solitary figure fell to his knees in reverence. It was one of the malcontents who had set fire to Maximus's tent earlier. Struck by fear and awe, he bowed his head low to the ground before Maximus. Then, like a wave sweeping across the sands, others started to kneel as well. From the strongest warrior to the most delicate slave, every individual present fell into submission before this miraculous spectacle. His soldiers did the same thing, seeing their lord emerge from fire unscathed. A small smile appeared across his face as his plan proved to be successful. Now, he was on to the next phase of his plan, which involved uniting the Dothraki under him. A week had passed since Maximus's plan was successful. The Dothraki had become fiercely loyal to him and saw him as their divine leader, the chosen one of the great stallion. The malcontents who had once conspired against him were now his most fervent supporters. Maximus, with Olerin and Eowyn by his side, began setting his other plans into motion. First, he ensured that all Dothraki under his command understood that he was not just a new leader, but a revolutionary one. He made it known that he intended to change their way of life forever, to bring about a civilization unlike anything the Dothraki had ever known before. He will defeat all the other Khals and become the sole ruler of the Dothraki. From what he knew about the world, Westeros had a population of about 40 million people living across the entire continent, while Essos, west of the mountains, had about 42 million people living within it. The Dothraki Sea itself had about 4 million people, which was a bit more than he expected, but then again, the Dothraki Sea was vast, and the hordes were many. Right now, he has 40,000 Dothraki followers, and most of them were children, women, elderly, and slaves. The 5,000, which were former Dothraki riders under the previous call, had become riders for Maximus, giving him a total of 5,000 cavalry, who can shoot arrows from horseback and are vicious fighters, even on foot. He started organizing the horde into several organized groups based on their skills and specialties. Each group was given specific tasks and roles to maintain order and efficiency within a khalasar. Maximus did not want to rule an aimless, mindless horde. He wanted an organized force capable of changing not just their own culture, but that of the entire world. Each group was led by 5 lawbringers who maintained order over their respective group and would make reports to Maximus if anything needed his attention. Next, he set out to expand his reach. He led his followers towards other khalasars with the intention to unite them under him. As he ventured further into the Dothraki Sea, the first encounter that he had was with a small khalasar consisting of 15,000 Dothraki riders with 30,000 women, children, and elderly. Their call was a tough man named Jorah who was not easily swayed by words alone. Maximus had around 10,000 soldiers with 5,000 being Dothraki riders, but numbers alone wouldn't allow Khal Jorah to win the battle as he had both Olerin and Eowyn on his side. Instead of straight up attacking, Maximus asked for a parley. He knew that Dothraki valued strength and courage more than anything else. So, he challenged Khal Joro to a duel to show his strength and convince his Khalasar to follow his lead. Khal Joro, being challenged like this by some foreign Khal, had no choice but to show his Khalasar that he was stronger than this foreign Khal, and to show Maximus what it was like to face a Khal. Under the hot sun of the vast grasslands, Maximus and Joro faced each other on horseback. Maximus didn't need his sword to deal with Joro, so he used one of the Dothraki weapons, a curved arak, to fight Khal Joro. The tension hung heavy in the air as they circled each other, each waiting for their opponent to make the first move. With a fierce yell, Joro charged at Maximus. His arak swung down with all his might, aiming for Maximus' shoulder. But Maximus deftly parried his attack and retaliated with a quick slash at Joro's side. The Khal quickly pivoted his horse to the side, narrowly escaping the blade. Yet, Maximus didn't stop there. With a fluid motion, he turned the parry into a full swing, aiming towards Joro's unprotected back. Joro managed to turn just in time to block the attack with his own arak. With each passing second, Maximus's popularity grew among the Dothraki. He was not just a foreigner with illusions of grandeur, but a formidable opponent who could hold his own against one of their Khals. At last, when he saw an opening in Joro's defense, Maximus lunged. His arak found its target on Joro's side before the Khal could react. Joro let out a loud groan and fell from his horse onto the grassy plain. Maximus dismounted his horse and approached the fallen Khal. He tossed aside his arak, placing his foot on Joro's chest to keep him down. His victory was clear and undisputed. Delivering the finishing blow, Maximus turned towards the crowd and raised his arak in the air with a loud scream. With Khal Joro defeated, his Khalasar had joined Maximus, recognizing his victory over their former Khal. Now he had a formidable army of 25,000 loyal men who were prepared to fight for him. Word quickly spread among the other Khalasars about the foreign Khal who had managed to take over 2 Khalasars and combine them into one under his leadership. His newly assembled force, now filled with a sense of unity and purpose, set off once again into the vast Dothraki Sea. Tales of a foreign Khal leading an unparalleled army spread across the plains like wildfire, carried by desert winds and whispered by traders passing through the area. Day by day, the Khalasar grew in numbers as more Khals either fell before Maximus or willingly joined him in his mission to unite the nomadic people. His fame was growing, and so was his influence. Some Khals surrendered without fighting, awed by the rumors of him being blessed by the great stallion. For months passed since Maximus had started his journey of unification. The once 40,000 followers had surged to an impressive 200,000, sprawling across the grasslands of the Dothraki Sea like a living river. It was a sight to behold. Thousands of tents sprawled across the sea like dots on a painter's canvas, each one housing Dothraki who had pledged their loyalty to Maximus. With this massive number of people, Maximus was making plans to move them towards a location where they would build their city. They needed a place that was near water and was a good location to build a city. Allerin, Ianwe, and Maximus had spent days before they settled on the ruined city of New York Sar. New York Sar, once a bustling city of the Valyrian freehold, was now but a whisper of its former glory. The structures of olden days lay in ruins, overgrown with the tenacious flora native to the region. The mighty Rhine River, once the lifeblood of the city, still flowed nearby, providing a much-needed source of water. When the bristling Khalasar arrived at the deserted city, Maximus rode forth alone. He dismounted his horse at the banks of the river and reached down to touch the clear, flowing water. Maximus turned back and raised his arms. "This is it," he shouted. "The place where we begin anew. New York Sar shall rise from its ashes. We will make it our own." His declaration echoed through the remains of New York Sar, and soon the air was filled with triumphant roars from his followers. They set up camp just outside the city, while Maximus rode some distance away to summon some people from the system. The first person who he summoned was a master builder for 100 system points, who would be in charge of constructing the city. Next, he summoned 400 stonemasons and 200 carpenters, which cost a total of 9,000 system points to construct the city. Each stonemason and carpenter would teach the Dothraki their knowledge, increasing the number of people that will work on constructing the city. The stonemasons and carpenters that he summoned before were working for Aaron and building more taverns in each of the free cities and a few places in Westeros. He had already sent Faraday to inform Aaron to start delivering the necessary supplies that they would need for constructing the city. They had been preparing for this moment, so they had enough funds, and with the Dothraki being fiercely loyal to him, he also had a free workforce. Slowly but surely, he was transforming the Dothraki under him into a more proper people and kept parts of their culture, but also changed a few things. It was easy to do with the use of magic and using the name of the Great Stallion to enforce these changes. Going back to Nirxar, Maximus had started organizing the Dothraki into various groups that will learn under the leadership of the carpenters and stonemasons. The construction wasn't planned to start until the next day, so for the night, a feast was organized and a grand celebration was put on. Maximus got some pristine meat from the system for 200 points, which made a few of the Dothraki bow down in reverence because of how good it tasted. Maximus simply told them that it was horse meat granted to them by the Great Stallion himself. They believed this and started to spread that news around the camp. Once they were gone, Maximus looked over his own sketch of the city that he had planned to construct. The size was grand, and its design would dwarf that of any current city present. Maximus envisioned a city that not only held grand structures and sprawling marketplaces, but also wide-open areas for horses to roam freely, an homage to the Dothraki's nomadic roots. There would be an expansive arena, a place for combat and feasts alike, mirroring V's Dothrak's Doshkaleen. His plans also included proper fortifications, something the Dothraki weren't accustomed to, but under his leadership were learning its importance. Stone walls would surround their city. Tall watchtowers would rise above the skyline, a clear sign of their power and resilience. For him, a grand palace would be constructed on one of the many coastlines as its own separate area from the rest of the city. Around the palace would be its own waterway with bridges that connected the main city to the palace. The palace itself would sit atop a hill with the surrounding area being barracks for soldiers, important characters, and buildings for throwing feasts and such. Outside of the city would be farmlands, barracks, and more houses for people to live in. Of course, all of this was not going to be completed within 5 years. The city would continue to be under construction for the years to come, but will be able to support a population of well over 5 million people. There would be a stadium for horse racing/fighting among other entertaining activities, which would become a good way for the Dothraki to entertain themselves and still hold on to their ancient customs. Separate from that would be another arena just for fighting. It would be located near the eastern gate of the city and be one of the first places that people see when they enter the city. The city would be called Heaven's Reach, a name that captured both the ambition of its creator and the awe-inspiring vastness of the great grass sea it overlooked. Maximus's vision for Heaven's Reach was not merely as a city, but as a beacon for the birth of a new civilization, a hub for commerce, culture, and community to thrive. The city would have districts dedicated to trades, arts, academia, faith, and more, each one meticulously planned and organized to support the people. Construction began at the dawn of the next day. Scores of Dothraki, under the guidance of stonemasons and carpenters, delved into their tasks with fervor. The once abandoned ruins of New York Sar started to buzz with concrete action as plans started taking physical form. He had also completed one of his quests. Quest completed. Find and claim a location for your empire's capital city. Rewards: 20k system points. X 1,000 stonemasons. X 500 carpenters. The work continued like this for a week before Maximus set off with 30,000 men to conquer the rest of the Dothraki Khalasars and become the sole call in charge of the Dothraki. There was still close to 4 million Dothraki and slaves left for him to conquer within the Dothraki Sea. So together with Olerin, he took his army back into the Dothraki Sea, leaving behind a garrison of 20,000 warriors and Ianwi to protect the city should an attack happen. The journey was long, stretching on for days that turn into weeks. They traversed the vast Dothraki Sea, riding through the plains during the day, camping beneath the vast sky at night. Each week brought with it fresh encounters with various Khalasars who had heard of Maximus's growing power and were not pleased with him calling himself a self-proclaimed Khal. For Maximus, this was perfect since he didn't want to leave any Khals left alive to challenge his authority. Each confrontation with the standing Khals was met with fierce battle cries and galloping horses, an orchestra of war that echoed across the sea. For every Khal that resisted, there was merciless retribution. Maximus chose not to kill them immediately, but instead challenged them to a duel in front of their followers. He would then best them in combat, showcasing his strength and dominance. As they continued their conquests, word spread like wildfire across the Dothraki Sea about the rising power of Maximus, the self-proclaimed Khal who was uniting all Khals under his rule. His reputation preceded him, and there were even tales of smaller Khalasars submitting without battle at his approach. Meanwhile, in King's Landing, King Aerys too had showed a slight improvement in terms of his health as well as his sister queen, Rhaella Targaryen. Although he still acted like his former self, he had become more rational and less prone to sudden outbursts of madness. The pyromaniacs were still under his employ, but they were no longer given free rein to ignite their wildfire wherever they pleased. A small improvement, but a significant one, nonetheless. Prince Rhaegar Targaryen had also become a behemoth with the vigor that he had gained from Maximus's potions. Faraday had already established a branch of the Shadow Hand within King's Landing and infiltrated the Red Keep. Faraday had also used this to keep Maximus in contact with the king, who wanted to grant Maximus a reward for what he had done for the royal family. The king's reward came in the form of an official invitation to serve as an honored advisor within the royal court, an intriguing proposal that Maximus considered. Yet, Maximus knew he needed to tread carefully. Accepting such a role would inevitably draw attention and scrutiny from those already nestled within the tangled web of court politics. The king's main motivation for this was because of the stories he was hearing from Varys about Maximus in Essos. He had taken over dozens of Khalasars and was becoming a rising power within Essos. On top of his potions, King Aerys wanted to secure Maximus as a potential ally as the current year, 282 AC, which had just started, had made him see that a potential rebellion might happen soon enough. And if that happened, he would need more of those potions to win the war. If Maximus was in King's Landing, then he might have forced him to take up the position, but since he was across the narrow sea in Essos, there wasn't much he could do. Already things were taking a turn for the worse. He had just found out that his son had disappeared with Lyanna Stark, which he knew would cause problems from the north. But he wasn't worried, since if they dared to do anything, then he would just burn them all. Faraday, on the other hand, didn't just establish himself in King's Landing, but also spread out to other major cities of the major houses of Westeros. He had personally met with various lords and ladies in secret while using the excuse of delivering more potions to meet with them. He had established various contacts and created various relationships with many of them, gaining him some valuable pawns to use. He was already aware of the situation that was happening in Westeros and of the impending war, and had already informed Maximus about. The reply that he got was a list of names upon which he was to make sure are constantly watched and protected, and when needed they are to be saved from any dangers. The list wasn't long, but it was filled with some names who he already recognized as major chess pieces on his board. He made sure that each person on the list was constantly watched and their location was always known. Back in Essos, Aaron had expanded the pub business a great deal. Now, there were more than 3 pubs in each city bringing in money, 8 caravans constantly moving between the free cities, and 2 trade fleets, which had about 40 ships for each fleet. The organization was named the Silver Serpent Trading Company and had the logo of a serpent placed on everything it owned. The Silver Serpent Trading Company had grown to such an extent that it had become a staple in the economies of the free cities. The employees of the company were well paid, and it was already known that if you worked for the Silver Serpent, then you were set for life. Though this also caused problems for some workers, since if they could be robbed by bandits and thieves, since it was known that they had money, and there weren't enough guards in each city to protect the workers without risking the pub. In response, Aaron contracted local sellswords and mercenaries to protect the pubs and their workers in each city. In addition to that, the Silver Serpent Trading Company continued to flourish. They started manufacturing their own goods, thereby reducing the cost of importing from other cities. They set up textile mills, blacksmithing shops, and started training people in various trades under expert guidance. The free cities began to see them not just as a trading company, but as an economic powerhouse that was majorly contributing to their increased prosperity. 2 months later, within the Dothraki Sea, Maximus's power continued to grow. He now had a massive army of 100,000 men and secured the loyalty of more than 500,000 Dothraki, who he sent back to Heaven's Reach to start contributing to the construction of the city. His campaign of unification, while brutal, was undeniably effective. Smaller Khalasars stood no chance against his own. Even the largest Khalasar had no chance of beating him, forcing many of them to join him without fighting. The calls of said Khalasars still dueled Maximus, so that he can show his strength in front of his newly acquired warriors. Stories had already traveled not only through the Dothraki Sea, but spilled into the free cities as well. The self-proclaimed Khal was gradually becoming a legend. However, during one battle, something unforeseen happened. He was fighting against a Khalasar who refused to join him, but during the battle he received a warning from the system. Warning! Outside interference detected. New quest. Survive the battle. Rewards? Before Maximus could fully process the warning, an arrow whistled through the air. He managed to deflect it, but more followed, raining from the sky in a deadly hailstorm. He quickly realized these weren't ordinary arrows. They were surrounded by a mysterious green flame. Shields were raised and horses whinnied in terror as the fiery rain descended upon them. Maximus tightened his grip on his mount, giving out orders amidst the chaos. The Dothraki who didn't use shields were at a disadvantage as their bodies were pierced by these strange arrows. Using his sword, he had cut down arrow after arrow, which emboldened his army after many of them died by the unforeseen attack. They had charged forward together alongside him over the dead bodies of both their comrades and their enemy. The barrage of arrows had not only killed some of his men, but also that of the enemies. As he was riding forward towards the enemy who were attempting to flee, he had seen a group of rogue riders emerge, their faces concealed by masks. Leading them was a man whose stature towered above the rest. He rode forward, brandishing a weapon Maximus had never seen before, a blazing whip that danced like dragonfire. Olorin had appeared next to him, just as the masked man's whip flew through the air like a fiery serpent. The soldier behind Maximus took the brunt of the whip, falling from his horse with a loud cry. "Archers!" Maximus commanded, his voice cutting through the sounds of battle. An immediate volley of arrows shot towards the masked group, but they moved like shadows, swiftly dodging with unnatural speed. "My lord, I think these might be forces far powerful than anything we have encountered before," said Olorin, observing the masked men. Maximus nodded his head, agreeing with what Olorin said. He had received a warning from the system about outside interference. The only logical thing he could think of was one of the magical forces hidden within the background of the world had interfered with his battle or perhaps seen him as a threat. The masked man had drove his horse forward as he slashed through the air towards Maximus, killing anybody in his way. However, Maximus was ready. With a swift sidestep on his horse, he evaded the strike and countered with a ferocious swing of his own sword. However, to Maximus's surprise, the masked man deflected it effortlessly and struck back immediately. This was no ordinary enemy. Olorin had started fighting the group of other masked riders while still keeping an eye on Maximus. He knew his lord could handle himself, but this was no ordinary adversary they were dealing with. Part of the battle felt like a dance of death where every misstep meant mortality. The clashing of steel reverberated through the air, punctuated by the screams of men and horses alike. The enemy was agile, and his strength seemed to match that of Maximus. The fire whip left nothing but ashes in its path. Maximus grunted as the masked man pushed him back with a strong kick. His horse reared up in fear, nearly forcing him off of his horse. But Maximus held on, his grip never weakening. He counterattacked with a powerful sideways swipe, which the masked man narrowly escaped. The clash between Maximus and the masked man intensified. With his dragon-like whip and agility, he moved with a precision that defied ordinary combat. Maximus's blade cut through the air, meeting the masked man's whip. The fire whip sizzled around Maximus's sword, its flames dangerously close to his skin. The masked man's eyes glowed through the slits of his mask, showing that he was indeed not a normal person. Maximus's thoughts raced. He needed to adapt quickly. The masked man was clearly a formidable foe, potentially enhanced by whatever magical forces were at play. His conventional tactics might not suffice. As his mind was elsewhere, the masked man had managed to make a swift move and was about to land an attack directly against Maximus. He didn't have enough time to block with his sword, so the only choice he had was to use his arm. As the whip wrapped around his arm, he screamed out in pain as it began to burn the entirety of his left arm. Even though he was in pain, Maximus still spotted the opportunity that had just appeared right in front of him. Not worrying about the safety of his arm, Maximus used all his strength and pulled the masked man off his horse, forcing him onto the ground. At the same time, he charged his horse forward, and as he got close, he jumped off, raising his sword in the air, hoping to deliver the finishing blow. The masked man barely managed to deflect the blow, but Maximus's strike was enough to cause him to stagger. Realizing that the fight might soon turn against him, the masked man let out a low growl. The ground around him seemed to shimmer with a faint, otherworldly light. At that moment, Olerin fought with equal ferocity against the other masked riders, his movements a blur as he fought through their ranks. He glanced towards Maximus, seeing that his lord was gaining the upper hand. Olerin charged through the remaining masked riders, his magic cleaving through their defenses as he made his way towards Maximus. The masked man, sensing the shifting balance of power, made a decisive move. He lashed his whip with one final, powerful strike, sending a wave of fire towards Maximus. The attack was intended to overwhelm him and end the fight in a blaze of fury. Maximus, eyes blazing with determination, lifted his sword in a desperate block. The heat of the fire whip seared against his armor, but he held his ground. His arm, which was burned from the previous attack, was still healing as he had to use it once again. However, this attack was more ferocious than the previous one and had caused him to fall unconscious. Olerin, who was behind the masked man, had delivered the finishing blow, causing his body to disappear entirely. After that, Olerin reached Maximus and started to cast healing magic on him, but he noticed that his wounds were already healing thanks to his super healing. With the masked man dead, the battle was basically over, so Olerin issued orders to the commanders to return to their camp while he teleported Maximus back to his tent so he can rest. Maximus had survived his first encounter with one of the few magical forces of this world, but this encounter was only a test conducted by the great stallion himself. While Maximus was unconscious, his mind was placed in a dark space, and in front of him stood a giant figure, luminous and imposing. He didn't recognize the figure in front of him, but he could guess that what just happened to him was probably caused by the figure in front of him. "Maximus!" The figure spoke, his voice echoing in the vast emptiness as he extended his out hand. "Your presence in this world hasn't gone unnoticed, at least for me. I can't speak for the other powerful deities and forces out there, but I've taken a keen interest in you." "What?" was all Maximus managed to ask. "Because not only have you managed to unite a large portion of the Dothraki people, but you have also secured their loyalty by utilizing your understanding of their culture, which I find intriguing. At first, I was wondering what your intentions were, but now that I know, I am curious to see how you will transform the Dothraki from a nomadic people to a proper civilization, and how your rise in power will affect the rest of the world." The figure stated. "Is this a test?" Maximus asked, his voice echoing through the silent void. "Am I being judged?" The figure chuckled. "Yes, indeed you are, and you have passed the test by defeating the masked man and his followers, proving to me that you are a capable warrior and leader," the figure added. Maximus narrowed his eyes. "What do you want from me?" "I do not desire anything from you, Maximus. I am merely a god for the Dothraki, people whom I mainly leave to their own affairs until somebody like you comes along to disrupt their way of life. I offer you but a proposal, Maximus. You continue to guide the Dothraki towards evolution, and I shall grant you my blessing. Decline, and you will be left to your own devices with the other forces of the world." The figure stated in a tone that was neither a threat nor a promise, but something in between. Maximus considered his words carefully. He had not come this far just to turn back now. With a heavy sigh, he nodded. "I accept." A chuckle echoed through the void as the figure lifted its hand, and a light enveloped Maximus. "When next you wake," the figure said, his voice resonating through the light, "you'll find my power within you. Use it wisely, Maximus." And then darkness swallowed him whole. When Maximus woke up, he found himself back in his own tent, Oleron at his side. His body was already healed from the damage he had taken by the masked man. Oleron looked relieved. "You gave us quite the scare, my lord." Maximus barely registered his words as he flexed his hand, feeling an unknown power coursing through his veins. As Maximus began to rise from his bed, Oleron rushed forward to support him. "Take it easy, my lord. You've been unconscious for nearly a day." Maximus pulled away from him gently. "I feel fine, Oleron." "More than fine, really," he said, standing fully upright. Oleron took a few steps back, his eyes widening in awe as he glanced at Maximus. "I believe our encounter with the masked man has resulted in something extraordinary," he muttered. "Yes, indeed, Oleron," Maximus finally managed to say. "I believe I've been blessed by the great stallion himself." His voice echoed with a latent power that sent shivers down Oleron's spine. Maximus walked towards the entrance of his tent, pushing aside the flaps to glance out into their encampment. The Dothraki men were busying themselves with their tasks, unaware of the drastic change their leader had undergone. He had completed the quest that he received during the battle, but decided to look at it later. Meanwhile, within Westeros, things were starting to kick off as news of Prince Rhaegar's disappearance with Lyanna Stark spread. Whispers and rumors filled the halls of every castle, leaving a tension that lingered in the air like a heavy fog. Over in the north, Eddard Stark and his father, Lord Rickard Stark, were consumed by anger and concern over the sudden disappearance of their beloved Lyanna. The North would not let this slide. They understood the grave implications of Rhaegar's reckless action. In response, Lyanna's eldest brother, Brandon Stark, went to King's Landing and stood in front of the Red Keep threatening Prince Rhaegar's life. Though Rhaegar himself was not present, King Aerys was, and he ordered Brandon's arrest. Brandon's father, Lord Rickard, was summoned to King's Landing in response to his son's actions. In the trial that followed, both Brandon and Rickard were killed by order of King Aerys with wildfire. However, King Aerys wasn't satisfied with this and had sent a raven to Jon Arryn, ordering him to send him the heads of both Eddard Stark and Robert Baratheon. But Jon Arryn refused, instead summoning his forces and raising his banners. The Grand Old Man of the Vale had fostered both Eddard Stark and Robert Baratheon in his youth, and he would not willingly send their heads to the Mad King. This act of defiance was what sparked the fires of rebellion, a war that would come to be known as Robert's Rebellion. Outraged at his refusal, King Aerys declared Jon Arryn a traitor. Robert Baratheon, who was betrothed to Lyanna Stark before her disappearance, joined forces with Jon Arryn, and thus the first alliances of the rebellion were formed. News spread quickly throughout Westeros. In Casterly Rock, Tywin Lannister watched the unfolding chaos with cold anticipation. The lion was always ready to pounce. He knew when to bide his time and when to strike. For now, he waited, his keen eyes observing all from within his fortress. The Reach stirred as well. House Tyrell whispering plans in secret gardens while their fields bloomed with golden roses. Mace Tyrell held counsel with his most trusted advisors, his mother Olenna amongst them, plotting their course in this changing tide. Amidst all the chaos, the Iron Islands remained a seething cauldron of potential rebellion. The Greyjoys, with their stormy history and contentious relationship with the mainland, were always a wild card. Balon Greyjoy watched from his castle on Pike, his eyes filled with a savage glee. He saw in the mainland's turmoil the opportunity for his long-desired dream, independence for the Iron Islands. Yet he too knew better than to act hastily. He bided his time, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The rewards he got from surviving the battle, while not what he expected, were still quite good. The Uruk-hai were brutal warriors of Middle-earth, and the strongest breed of orc. And he had 2 legions of them, which numbered 10,000 total Uruk-hai, 5,000 per legion. He didn't summon them immediately, but waited because this would be the first time in which he would summon an orc-type unit from another world. He didn't know how the Dothraki would act, though he was sure that if he summoned them in front of the Dothraki, then they might start to see him as a god. That's when an idea came into this mind. He could summon the Uruk-hai in front of the Dothraki while claiming that they were powerful warriors sent by the great stallion himself to aid them in their conquest of the other Khalasars. He had used the great stallion to increase his authority amongst the Dothraki before, and now that he was blessed, he was sure that using his name again would not be a problem or might even prove to be extremely successful. So, within his camp, he gathered everybody in one location and started to tell them about how the great stallion had given them a gift for their efforts. Maximus had already talked to Olerin about summoning the Uruk-hai since he knew that he had a history with them. Olerin was fine with it. As long as the Uruk-hai obeyed their orders, then he would not have a problem. He then explained how he didn't dislike the Uruk-hai, but the people whom they often served and fought for. With that settled, Maximus stood in front of the assembled crowd of Dothraki, his voice echoing throughout the camp as he told tales of the great stallion's favor. The murmur amongst the crowd grew even louder as his story reached its climax. And so, Maximus announced, his voice carrying a strong sense of authority, the great stallion, pleased with our valor and courage in battle, has blessed us with warriors as fierce as the tempest, as brutal as the desert storm. Warriors that will send our enemies running in fear. Warriors that will make us unstoppable. The anticipation in the crowd was tangible. Maximus turned away from the crowd and began summoning the 2 legions of Uruk-hai from the system. The ground trembled beneath their feet as from out of thin air 2 legions of Uruk-hai emerged, 10,000 strong. Their armor glinted menacingly under the sun, and their cruel swords were drawn ready for battle. An awed silence swept through the Dothraki crowd before erupting into triumphant cheers. They raised their aurochs high into the sky, their shouts echoing throughout the plains. The sight of these brutal orc warriors materializing from thin air had left them in awe of Maximus, reinforcing the belief that he was indeed a god-chosen leader. Maximus stood proudly, watching as his new Uruk-hai legions integrated with his Dothraki warriors. The Dothraki, once filled with wary curiosity, now approached the Uruk-hai without fear, eager to meet these new allies granted by the great stallion himself. The Uruk-hai, for their part, followed Maximus's commands, bowing in fealty. Their deep guttural voices echoed through the camp as they chanted their loyalty. "Now we march," Maximus declared. "We march toward victory." And so they did. With an army composed of powerful Dothraki riders and the Uruk-hai orcs from Mordor, Maximus led them towards their next battle. Meanwhile, near the city of Heaven's Reach, Alexander had just arrived as 300 mercenary warriors plus some additional warriors who had joined them, making the total force around 500. At first, they met with a group of Dothraki riders, trying to figure out what army dared to approach their city. But Eonwe had recognized who Alexander was and told the Dothraki to stand down. Eonwe greeted him and welcomed him to the grand city that their lord planned to build while allowing the 500 warriors under Alexander's command to enter the city. As Alexander and his men made their way into the city, they were awestruck by the thousands of people who were hard at work building what they saw was going to be a massive city. He could already see people digging the outline of what he knew would probably be the wall, while on the inside, he could already see foundations for houses being built. "Welcome to our new home," we announced, spreading his arms wide as if he was presenting the city himself. Our Lord has named it Heaven's Reach, because it will represent something not of this world. Alexander nodded in curiosity. He knew that his Lord aimed high, but he hadn't imagined a city this magnificent. As he walked through the bustling city, he saw children playing some games with each other and elderly quietly resting in the shaded areas of the city. In Westeros, things were starting to heat up in the war. The Starks of Winterfell, under the new leadership of Eddard, allied themselves with Jon Arryn of the Vale and Robert Baratheon of Storm's End. Eddard, consumed by grief and anger over his father and brother's brutal deaths and Lyanna's disappearance, was ready for battle. His strength and motivation to get revenge for his brother and father and find his sister had echoed throughout the north, rallying his people behind him. Robert Baratheon, a man renowned for his power and ferocity in battle, cried out for justice. His love for Lyanna Stark had been well known. The prince's abduction of her was not just a theft, but a personal affront to him. He demanded retribution for the wrongs inflicted upon his betrothed and her family. Jon Arryn, known for his wisdom and leadership, became a beacon of hope among his men. It was under his guidance that the rebellion truly took shape. In contrast to these newly formed alliances, Tywin Lannister continued to observe from Casterly Rock, refusing to declare an alliance with either side. The cunning old lion kept his cards close to his chest, his calculating eyes missing nothing of the unfolding drama. When the time was right, he would strike. While Maximus marched off to conquer the rest of the Dothraki and finally end the war, he had tasked 20 warmongers to assist Faraday with the plans he had set up in Westeros. Already things were being set in motion. In the Vale, Jon Arryn had faced a problem as Lord Mark Grafton had gathered the loyalists of the crown to keep Jon Arryn from entering the port of Gulltown. But with the help of Robert Baratheon, he had defeated Lord Grafton and taken Gulltown, with Robert killing Lord Grafton during the battle. After that, Robert returned to Storm's End and called his banners, but faced similar problems as Jon Arryn did. Robert Baratheon had called his banners to Storm's End, but not all sided with him. Particularly Lords Grandison, Caffrey, and Fell, who had gathered their hosts and planned to join forces at Summerhall to march on Storm's End. But thanks to a member of the Shadow Hand, Robert was warned about the converging forces. In response, he rode with his knights and squires to Summerhall, where he attacked each host in turn. Lord Caffrey and Grandison were taken prisoner, while Lord Fell was killed during his battle with Robert, and his son also taken captive. The 3 prisoners were taken back to Storm's End, leaving Robert free to gather his forces and march north, to join up with Jon Arryn and the Northmen. While Robert had gathered his forces and began his march towards the north, Jon Arryn was able to consolidate his forces, marching southwards from Gulltown, capturing holdfasts and towns loyal to the crown. He knew that they needed to gather as much support as possible before crossing blades with the House Targaryen, as they had a much greater support behind them considering the fact that they had ruled King's Landing for many years. In Essos, Maximus was busy with other matters, leaving everything within Faraday's control. He knew Faraday would get the job done and make the right decisions. On the other hand, the Dothraki and Uruk-hai were restless, filled with a ferocious desire for battle. Over the course of 8 months, they made great progress through the Dothraki Sea, increasing the size of Maximus's Khalasar, and were finally about to head to Viz Dothrak for the final battle that would unite the Dothraki under Maximus. The towering crags of the Mother of Mountains loomed in sight, and next to them rose the horse-heart-shaped city of Viz Dothrak. This was the place where all calls were considered equal, where no blood could be shed under penalty of death. But Maximus knew well that these sacred laws would not stop the other calls from challenging his rule. Maximus stood in front of the city, his eyes scanning the horizon, where he knew the remaining calls and their blood riders would soon appear for the final showdown. He had already won over the majority of the Dothraki, making his vast Khalasar stretch for miles with hundreds of thousands of people eagerly following him. But the remaining calls continued to resist him, and that was fine for him, as all he needed to do was crush them and prove his strength in battle. In Heaven's Reach, construction was well underway. Alexander had led his men to join the building effort, contributing to the rapid development of a strong infrastructure. The outer walls were about 30% completed, with about 40% of the inner city being completed. The foundations for towers were being dug out, which would stretch for miles considering the size of the city. While in modern times, building such a city would be hard if not for a massive economical backing and willing workers. In medieval times, people would work as long as they were provided with their basic necessities, while pay was a secondary concern. Maximus was using this, as well as his high influence amongst the Dothraki, to be able to have almost 100,000 people actively building the city every day for around 12 hours. They were provided with food and housing, as well as a sense of security, while being rewarded with gold and coins that they could use to buy previous and luxury things for passing traders until the economy of the city got running. However, the reaction from the surrounding free cities was not great at all. In Qohor, the city closest to Heaven's Reach, the great masters had called Heaven's Reach a city of savages and had refused to trade or recognize the sovereignty of the city. Tensions were escalating, especially after a few violent encounters at the borders. The lords of Qohor sent missives to their allies, condemning Maximus and his followers. These letters painted a picture of blatant savagery, hoping to turn public opinion against Heaven's Reach and thus starve them into submission. Little did they know Heaven's Reach was far from dependent on their meager resources. In Norvos, the second city near Heaven's Reach, the reaction was a bit more tempered. The Norvashi were a pragmatic people, keen on trade and mercantile success. They saw the rise of Heaven's Reach not as a threat to stability, but as an opportunity for profit. They sent envoys bearing gifts of silk and spices, curious to explore the possibilities that the new city had to offer. They saw this as a great opportunity to stop the Dothraki raids against the free cities. Despite their contrasting sentiments, neither Qohor nor Norvos would dare to take military action without the support of greater powers. In Essos, that always meant the free city of Volantis, the oldest and grandest of them all, where slaver nobility ruled over an empire built on chains. Their response would ultimately shape the region's stance towards Heaven's Reach. For now, things were calm, but given enough time, especially when Heaven's Reach finished construction, the other free cities will start to get involved and see it as a threat. But only time would tell which of the free cities would resort to war or other methods. Standing in front of V's Dothrak, Maximus was at the head of his massive army, watching the other calls charge at him in a desperate attempt to defend themselves against the person they deemed as the foreign call. On top of his horse, Maximus had stood in front of his army. As the calls drew nearer, Maximus raised his sword high above his head, and with one swift, downward motion of his arm, he brought down the weapon and roared a single word. Charge! The ground shook as hundreds of thousands of hooves thundered forward, charging towards the opposing calls with ferocious speed and power, followed by the Urak High Orcs. The air was filled with wild war cries, a symphony of adrenaline-fueled fury that echoed throughout the plains of V's Dothrak. At the front of this massive horde was Maximus, followed by Olerin, who had transferred into a bird and was flying overhead. Maximus claimed the first kill as he cleaved the head of the call who had charged in first. Following behind him was his own riders, who followed their call into battle, clashing with the defiant calls who dared stand in their way. A few of the riders had stood on top of their horse as it was riding forward and shot arrows at the opposing forces. Each arrow found its mark, the skilled archers of the Khalasar proving their might as they felled rider after rider. The sight was indeed dreadful, a storm of arrows descending upon the enemy like a swarm of enraged hornets. The opposing riders attempted to do the same, but Maximus's army had the power of magic on their side. The incoming arrows were deflected by Olerin's magic, causing even more casualties on the opposing force's side. As the battle raged on, Maximus met Khal Bako in single combat, their horses crashing into each other like waves against a cliffside. Bako lunged at Maximus, but he deflected the blow and twisted his saddle, swinging his sword across Bako's torso, sending him crashing to the ground. The death of Khal Bako sparked terror amongst his riders, seeing that he never even stood a chance against Maximus. This sight had a domino effect. One by one, the Khals started falling, losing their lives attempting to resist the force that was Maximus and his riders. The battlefield was filled with blood and cries of pain, creating a grim spectacle for anyone watching from afar. The sight of the defeated Khals largely demoralized their followers, causing them to start believing the rumors that Maximus was blessed by the great stallion himself. After that, they walked towards V's Dothrak, the once busy streets, now silent, as the people who inhabited it watched in trepidation. The city was not used to seeing such a large khalasar within its walls, but they knew better than to question these visitors. Maximus rode at the forefront, taking in the sight of a city that was home to Khals who were now dead. Once inside the city, Maximus immediately started to reorganize. He established his own command center in what had been the heart of the city, an area only used for religious ceremonies and sacred rituals in regular times. A day later in Heaven's Reach, news of Maximus's victory had reached Ianwi via a raven sent by Olerin. A cheer rose amongst the residents as the announcement was made. Their call had emerged victorious, making their hard work justified and their belief in him soar to new heights. In V's Dothrak, not only did Maximus acquire the only Dothraki city, but also a very important trade city which housed markets from both the west and east. The western market within the city was used by traders from the other free cities in Westeros, which Lysine perfumes, Myrish lace, fine wools, Pintoshi dyes, and goldwork from Lannisport. The eastern market had traders from Et, Ashai, and the Shadowlands. Their market generally contained animals such as manticores and silver cages, gray elephants, and striped white and black horses, zorses, of the Jogos Nai. A zorse is a striped black and white horse bred by the Jogos Nai, who live on the plains north of Et, east of the Dothraki Sea and the Bone Mountains. Zorses have been described as fierce and foul-tempered. They are hardy beasts, supposedly capable of surviving on weeds and devil grass for many months, and are able to travel long distances without water or food. The Jogos Nai are a head shorter than the Dothraki and are described as squat, bow-legged, and swarthy, with large heads, small faces, and shallow-colored skin. Men and women both have pointed skulls, a result of the custom of binding the heads of their newborn during the first 2 years of life. Similar to the Dothraki in a sense, they are a nomadic people who live in yurts, tents, and saddles. They are a proud, warlike race who prize freedom above all and are never content to remain in one place for long. They traveled the same way a Dothraki khalasar did, with a war chief being in command of the entire band. But, unlike the Dothraki khalasars, Jogos Nai bands do not make war upon one another, as their gods forbid them to shed the blood of their own people. Young men do ride out to steal goats, zorses, and dogs from other bands, while girls go forth to abduct husbands. But these are rituals hallowed by the gods, during which no blood may be shed. However, the Jogos Nai do live in a perpetual state of warfare against all their neighboring peoples. Having secured V's Dothrak, Maximus planned to turn the city into a true trade city that would rival that of any free city and establish it as the connection between the Western world and the Eastern world. There were other trade routes via sea, but there was never a truly established safe land route connecting the two. In King's Landing, Queen Rhaella Targaryen was meeting in secret with Faraday, whom she had spoken with quite frequently ever since she had gotten better. She was also currently pregnant with a child and due in a few months. "My lady, as said before, should the worst come, my lord has entrusted your safety with me," stated Faraday, as slightly bowing towards the queen. He had referred to her as my lady rather than my queen simply because he served another already. So calling her my queen would not be appropriate, which was something she understood and didn't say anything about it. "I trust you, Faraday," Queen Rhaella responded, her fingers gently stroking her swollen belly. "But even with your assurances, there is still an undercurrent of uncertainty. The child," she glanced down at her stomach, "I worry for its future." Faraday nodded solemnly. Your fears are not unfounded, my lady. But remember, my lord Maximus is making significant strides in Essos. News of his victories travels fast, and his influence grows with each passing day. Yes, Maximus, Queen Riella murmured, a faint smile passing her lips. Despite the distance and the chaos that had ensued, she felt a renewed hope with each word about Maximus's accomplishments. She trusted him too, even though she had never met him, because he was the one who provided her with the potion which healed her and even improved her husband's mind, if only by a little. Further north on Westeros' shores, Varys the Spider sat at his desk penning letters to his informants spread out in all directions across the Seven Kingdoms and further across the Narrow Sea. His little birds whispered to him of Maximus's achievements as he watched with curiosity at how quickly the world was changing. With the impending war on the horizon, all he could do was see what happened while he monitored the situation through the news from his little birds. Having taken over V's Dothrak and having the biggest Khalasar ever in Dothraki history, Maximus had started being referenced as the stallion who mounts the world. Maximus had also come out and created the title of High Call, which is higher than any regular call. He had done something that no call had ever done before, and he still had a lot more that he planned to do. Olorin had suggested that he use the title of High Call since it still represented the Dothraki culture in its name, but also elevated his status to another level above any other call. Now he was the High Call of the Dothraki, a title that would be the first of many that he would receive. The night was filled with the sound of feasting and laughter as Maximus sat amongst his men, at the heart of V's Dothrak. He sat on a throne of woven horsehair with Olorin sitting in a chair beside him, enjoying the taste of the food and alcohol that he had shipped from his nearby tavern in Qohor. Throughout the night, Maximus raised his cup towards the vast sea of warriors before him. Stories of their exploits were being spread throughout the city, tales of courage and extraordinary skill on the battlefield that caused even the most hardened Dothraki warriors to want to fight. In the morning, Maximus visited the sacred lake where each Khal's widow, known as Dosh Khaleen, would be brought after their husband's death. He had learned a lot about the Dothraki culture throughout his time riding and camping with them. He had not taken any wife yet, but that still didn't stop him from having some fun, especially when the Dothraki women are drawn to the strong. Olorin even helped some of them after making sure that they were not assassins. He had appointed 10 Dothraki women as Maximus's personnel caretakers and had them trained in basic healing techniques. The women, who now proudly refer to themselves as the Horse Lord's handmaidens, had taken their new roles with fervor. They were eager to assist their High Call in any way possible. Meanwhile, on the Eastern Market, work had begun on restructuring the trading stations. With Maximus' immense wealth and power, he not only ensured the safety of traders, but also offered incentives for those who would set up shops and trade routes in V's Dothrak. He understood that a prosperous city was one that thrived on commerce, and he was determined to make V's Dothrak the jewel of the East. As the days turned into weeks, the city of V's Dothrak began to transform under Maximus's rule. The massive market now pulsed with life. Traders from all over Essos flocked to the city, bringing their exotic wares. Fruits from the Summer Islands, silks from Carve, spices from Et, wines from Volantis, they all filled the stalls of the market. During this time, Maximus had also sent more than 600,000 people marching towards the construction side of his capital to, one, have a bigger population living within the city, and two, to have more people working in its construction. As of now, it was projected to be fully completed in 2 years. Already, he had in his mind the various positions that would be set up to assist him once he proclaims himself king and formally establishes his kingdom. Later down the line, once he conquered more territory and land, then he would proclaim himself an emperor, ruling over a vast amount of land. For the Dothraki, Maximus had found out that he could summon priests from the system, which offered him the option of having those priests be worshippers of the Dothraki religion and culture. From what the system told him, this option was because he was now blessed by the Great Stallion and could now summon various units that have unique options relating to the Dothraki. This was a major development and a great feature that the system had, so he summoned 1,000 priests. The priests that he summoned were knowledgeable in the Dothraki language and culture and could conduct religious services in their native tongue. This would allow Maximus to increase his already high religious standing among the Dothraki and create an educated population. His excuse for these new people was simply that they were sent by the Great Stallion to teach the Dothraki the way of their future. With the system, it was easy to increase how the Dothraki people see him, as he could summon a person and simply say that they were sent by the Great Stallion. His meetings with the Dashkaline became more frequent as he sought both their wisdom of the Dothraki history and to get them on his side. They were influential figures in Dothraki society, and seeking their guidance was a way of increasing his standing and influence and get rid of the foreigner title that the now-dead Khals had called him. Half of the priests were sent to Heaven's Reach alongside a large escort of Dothraki riders. Buildings for schools were already set up in Heaven's Reach, and it would allow Maximus to start teaching his large population simple things like reading, writing, and basic arithmetic. The other half stayed within V's Dothrak to begin the education of the Dothraki present within the city. Adults and children would learn to read and write once paper gets introduced, in their own language, as well as High Valyrian and Low Valyrian, to be able to interact with the people of Essos freely. The construction of Heaven's Reach, which would be his capital city, was making steady progress. Eowyn's magic was instrumental in speeding up the construction process. The wizard would use his power to effortlessly lift heavy stones and set them in place with a precision no human hands could match. With all this progress, Maximus didn't neglect his Dothraki warriors. True to his title as High Khal, he introduced more training regimes to their daily schedules. While the Dothraki were already powerful fighters, their style was wilder than it was refined. Maximus wanted to change this, as having a more refined technique would increase their fighting ability and make them deadlier both on horseback and foot. The Uruk-hai had found a place within V's Dothrak and had begun breeding amongst themselves and with a few Dothraki. The Uruk-hai and the Dothraki were both warrior races with established traditions that involve respecting strength above all else. Thus, the fusion of two such cultures was a sight to behold. The Uruk-hai brought with them their superior discipline and battle strategies, while the Dothraki brought their mastery of horseback fighting and archery. After a few more weeks, he would head back to Heaven's Reach to check on the progress of the city. 283 AC King's Landing. It has been a few months since the rebel forces began their campaign against King Aerys II. Rhaegar Targaryen had returned from the south, where he was hiding, and had begun assembling a host to counter the rebel army that had marched against his father. He convinced King Aerys to ask Tywin Lannister for help, which is also what Jon Arryn had did. At the same time, Aerys commanded his alchemists to place caches of wildfire on multiple locations in King's Landing. In need of an heir after the death of both his sons, Jon Arryn had accepted a betrothal from Lord Holster Tully to marry his daughter, Lisa. In addition, Lord Eddard Stark had married Catelyn after they won the Battle of the Bells and captured Stony September. It was a dual marriage that happened on the same day between Catelyn and Lord Eddard Stark, Lisa, and Jon Arryn of the Vale. In Dorne, Prince Doran Martell, after refusing to send aid to King Aerys due to both his caution as well as his anger over Elijah's treatment, had eventually agreed to send 10,000 Dornishmen to strengthen the army Prince Rhaegar Targaryen was gathering. King Aerys sent Prince Lewin Martell, Doran's uncle, to take command of these forces, but also threatened him by stating that he held Princess Elia Martell, Prince Rhaegar's wife, and their two young children, Rhaenys and Aegon, hostage. Sometime after this, the Loyalist army, led by Prince Rhaegar, numbering 40,000 men, had met the rebel army, which numbered 30,000 men at a crossing in the Trident, which became one of the major battles of the war. Prince Rhaegar, with his greatly improved vigor from Maximus's potion, had met Robert in battle, injuring him. However, in a move of cowardice, Rhaegar was killed by a rain of arrows as he was recovering from the fight. Robert was spared as the arrows narrowly missed him, but Rhaegar was hit with at least 5 in his chest. But he still stayed up only with the support of his sword as he tried to continue the fight. Seeing the prince severely injured, Robert hurried to his feet despite his injuries and swung his hammer at Rhaegar's chest, sending him flying into the nearby river. After that, the rebel forces had claimed victory over the Loyalist army and had proceeded to march on King's Landing. Learning of the defeat of his army, King Aerys had sent his wife, Queen Rhaella, and his new heir, their second son, Prince Viserys, to Dragonstone for safety, where they would have the protection of, amongst others, Ser Willem Darry, the master-at-arms of the Red Keep, and the royal fleet. Aerys refused to allow Rhaegar's wife, Princess Elia Martell, and their children Rhaenys and Aegon, to leave the city, keeping them by his side instead. However, their safety was already guaranteed by Faraday, who had 4 of the warmongers ready to rescue them once the rebel army attacked. The other 16 warmongers were at Dragonstone and would be assigned to protect the queen, who already knew about their presence. Once she arrived, her Kingsguard had their weapons ready to kill the armored man who dared infiltrated the castle, but was told otherwise by the queen herself. She explained how they were allies here to help. However, the Kingsguard remained skeptical of the situation, considering the protection of the queen was their job. Back to King's Landing, the remnants of Prince Rhaegar's army had arrived within the city. Behind them was Lord Tywin's army. Lord Tywin Lannister had refused calls to arms from both the Loyalists and the rebels until this point, but now had appeared at the gates of King's Landing with an army of 12,000 men. Lord Tywin professed his loyalty to King Aerys, and while Lord Varys counseled Aerys to keep the gates locked, the king chose to listen to Grand Maester Pycelle and open the gates to Tywin's men. However, what happened next was nothing short of a betrayal. Once inside the gates, Lord Tywin's army had begun to sack the city. Seeing the chaos ensuing, Faraday had implemented his plan and snuck the 4 warmongers into the Red Keep. Once inside, they made their way towards where Princess Elia Martell and her children were, taking out a few guards along the way. They remained undetected while King Aerys had ordered Rossart to ignite the wildfire caches throughout the city, wishing to leave Robert nothing but ashes and bones. He ordered Ser Jaime Lannister, Lord Tywin's eldest son and the only knight of his Kingsguard present in the city, to kill Tywin and bring his head to Aerys. Instead, Jaime killed Rossart, and upon the realization that Aerys would simply give the order to burn the city down to another pyromancer, returned to the Red Keep and attempted to kill King Aerys himself, but his sword was stopped by Faraday as he appeared out of the shadows. A knight of the Kingsguard killing the person he is sworn to protect. Such a disgrace you are, said Faraday. Your words may cut true, stranger. Jaime spat back, his green eyes burning with a defiance that matched the intensity of the fires that threatened to consume King's Landing. But what would you have me do? Stand by and watch as this city and all its innocent people are reduced to cinders. Faraday pushed back, causing Jaime to stumble back a few steps before he caught his bearing. But what he saw next was something else. Cloaked figures were standing around the throne room surrounding him, while another had snuck up behind the king and stuck a dagger through his heart. Faraday turned around to face the king as he spoke one last sentence towards him. The queen will be protected was the last thing King Aerys heard as his body went lifeless. Who are you people? Questioned Jaime as he kept his defense up, ready to repel any attacks that come towards him. In time you will know. But for now, we take our leave, said Faraday, as after Jaime blinked his eyes, the figures before him had all disappeared and soldiers from his father's army had come storming into the room. Within Maegor's holdfast, Ser Gregor Clegane and Ser Amory Lorch had entered, with plans to deal with the rest of the royal family, to secure the throne for Robert, and to prove that House Lannister had forsaken the Targaryens forever. However, they had encountered strange, armored men as they stormed the building. Guarding the entrance to Princess Elia Martell's room were 2 warmongers who were tasked with securing the entrance to the room, while the princess, alongside her children, and a few handmaidens had hidden. The warmongers had only just arrived a few seconds before Ser Gregor Clegane had so. They couldn't escape fast enough before they arrived. Standing at the front of the door was one of the towering, armored figures, its gleaming helmet showing no hint of fear at the arrival of the dreaded mountain and his companion. Gregor Clegane gave a low growl of annoyance. "Out o' my way," he commanded, his deep voice echoing ominously through the hallway. The armored figure did not move, causing Clegane's frustration to mount even further. "I suggest you leave this area. We are tasked with protecting this door, and should you interfere, then we will kill you. But should you leave now, then we will not bother you," the warmonger declared. "Who in seven hells do you think you are, telling me what to do?" Clegane roared, drawing his enormous sword. That's when the door opened, revealing the leader of the warmongers. Behind him was Princess Elia, her children, and the few handmaidens that she had. Seeing them, Ser Gregor, Clegane roared a battle cry and charged towards the warmongers.